Hey everyone, we are live. Seems like I just did this the other day, and the day before that. Seems like all I'm doing is being on YouTube. Steve Glicker from Roll for Combat. I'm the publisher, and with me is Mark Seifter, director of game design.
Hello.
Who I've not seen in almost a week and a half, 2 weeks, because I was on vacation and then he was away, and it's like it's kind of weird. It's like not seeing your work wife. But with us today is someone who probably most of you have read his stuff on the Alexandrian, but don't know what he looks like. Even I wasn't sure what you look like, but now we know. You got to have it on your book, and you're like the big face back here. Is Justin Alexander from the Alexandrian? How are
The
you,
mystery
Justin?
has been stripped away.
It
Thanks for having me on today.
has. Yeah,
Didn't even take 3 clues.
it didn't even. Oh,
Yeah, that's right. All you would have had to do is watch one of his videos, Steven.
Uh-huh. That's right. Well,
Did you see his Candela Obscura review?
you know what? Okay. I actually was just talking to someone about this. I'm one of those people who listens to,
Oh.
yeah, who listens to YouTube, not as much watches
I
it.
mostly do too, but even while I see a little bit of the images.
Mm-hmm. So
I'm amazed you could tune away from this magnificent COVID beard that I have.
did you keep your COVID beard? You're one of
I
those?
did, yeah. I before COVID I didn't actually have a beard, but so this is March 22 and forward is the the new Justin. It's not new anymore. It's 2024 now. I probably should get over it, but yeah, this is my COVID beard.
Well, I've had this goatee, although I shaved it today so you can barely see it. I've had it since '99, and the only reason I grew it is because all Mike Piazza and Mike Hamilton from the Mets had it, and I thought they looked cool, so I tried to grow it. And then everyone I know had one, and then I just never unshaved it off. And then I tried to grow a beard during COVID, but it was very itchy and no one liked it, so I gave up. So it's that first like 6-8 weeks you got to get through. That's the toughest part. It gets really, really itchy. So, but look
Yeah,
at you.
the two times I've had a beard in my life, one was because I had to grow it for a part I was playing in a Shakespeare play. And so it motivated me to get through that, like you say, 6 to 8 week period of like being like, this should probably go. And then the second time was COVID, where I was just like, well, no one's seeing me anyways. So
Now you got the ZZ Top type beard. Almost.
yeah.
You're getting there.
Famine to feast.
Yeah. Well, you see, you can't shave it because it'll take you years to get that back. So.
Right.
So for those who don't know who you are, before we get into news and info, who are you? Why are you here? Well, tell us everything you know. Explain this 500-page book in 2 minutes. Go.
Okay. Well, I am Justin Alexander. I have been a game master since 1989 when I first started getting into the hobby. And in the late 90s, I started writing reviews of role-playing games for RPGNet and Gaming Outpost and Pyramid Magazine. And from there, I kind of leapt into the industry itself, started doing supplements for companies like DreamPod 9, Steve Jackson Games, Fantasy Flight Games, Atlas Games, and the like. My most recent book, as you just showed off, is So You Want to Be a Game Master. This released in November from Page Street Publishing and Macmillan. And so you can find them in Barnes & Nobles and Amazons and Blackwells and similar outlets and bookstores all over the place. So this is kind of a major new thing. And like you say, it is 544 pages, which was a surprise to me when it arrived. I was anticipating it being quite the thick boy that it is. But this is a book I've been working on for a few years now and really wanted to have a book that was designed to show the way that I think about game mastering. I think there's a lot of really awesome game mastering advice books out there, but they tend to fall into one of two camps, which is either hyper-specific advice for people looking to solve very specific problems, like here's how you create the history of your world, or it's very general stuff like listen to your players, and that's good advice. I'm not saying any of that is bad advice or shouldn't be things that you should take advice for. I lost track of that sentence halfway through there.
Mhm.
But I found that this is really the book I wanted when I was 10 years old and getting into role-playing games for the first time, because what I really wanted was when they just told me, hey, here's what you do. You do 1, you do 2, you do 3, and then that's how you run a game. And so that's sort of the root of this book, is my belief and philosophy is that game mastering is a lot simpler and easier than we sometimes make it, and a lot less of an arcane rite, and much more of a procedure and process you can follow that you can then pour all of your creativity into, while having that sort of underlying structure, that 1, 2, 3 step kind of thing, to make sure that it's, you actually know what you're supposed to be doing to get ready for the game and at the table with your players.
Well, I'm looking forward to reading it. I'm going to compare it to my favorite DM book. It's Dungeon Mastering for Dummies.
Is that your favorite one? What makes it the best?
It's by James Wyatt.
James Wyatt is pretty awesome.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
GMing
It's like remember those For Dummies books? Except that you look at the author and you're like, holy crap, it's James Wyatt wrote that. It's like, all right, it's actually not a bad book. There's we were talking about this on the stream the other day with Derek. Is that there's the Dungeons and Dragons for Dummies, and the Dungeon Master Guide for Dummies, and these came out in like 2088, but they were written by let's see, the D&D for Dummies. You think of these books like, oh, there's joke books, but James Wright wrote that one, and then let's see, the Dungeons and Dragons for Dummies is, hold on, it's taking me a second. That's by Richard Baker. And Bill Slavics.
Yeah, Bill Slavics. Yeah.
So you're like, holy crap! These are like legendary,
strong names from D&D past.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So what made them good is that they wrote it with like a love and reverence, and it felt like you were talking to a friend. But I presume yours is. I mean, I've been reading your blog forever, and boy, Professor Dungeon Master. He won't stop talking about this book. Every time I talk to him, I'm going to see him all weekend. He read this thing in one day. He read 544 pages in one day. That's how much he liked it. So
I was blown away by how much he liked the book, and I also do not know how he managed to read it in one day. Every time, because I've read it many times, because you have to go through and do all the galley proofing and air checking on it, and each time I did that, it took me more than one day to go through the full book. And
yeah, he is well, his is funny too, because not only is his read, but if you notice, if you look at the videos, his is like hundreds of little stickets and post-it notes, because he's like referencing it. I'll ask him to bring it. So I was going to bring it, and this is even before I knew you were going to be on the show. I was going to bring with me. I went to Columbia, but your book is so damn big, I couldn't fit it in my bag. And it was a good thing I didn't bring it, because in Colombia, it's like 100 degrees with 100% humidity.
Oh my goodness.
Everything I had was wet. This book would have melted. I would have come back. It would have been like covered in fungus and mushrooms and melted.
Yeah, these days I tend to take my Kindle for reading when I go on trips. But I remember there was one trip where I took like a stack of paperbacks to Mexico, and like you say, super humid that day, and all the paperbacks were literally twice as large by the time I left, as opposed to when I brought them there.
Yeah, I'm glad I didn't bring any. I was going to bring some like D&D or whatever, some more role-playing books, and I was like, thank God I didn't bring any books, because boy, those things would have been ruined down here. It was so hot. It was like really, 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 really hot. Did you do anything fun over the vacation, Justin? Or
so my wife and my 7-year-old daughter, we all stayed home and hosted Christmas. So we had family come over to us. So we baked cookies, and we had a great Christmas morning. Santa Claus visited us, which was delightful. So in the morning, my daughter was running around finding the carrots on the front walk, because that's apparently where they park the sleigh here at the new house, and little carrot chunks from the reindeer getting their treat for the evening. So we just took a well-deserved break, and that was fun for us.
That sounds good.
It seems like there's a lot of people in the chat who are thanking Justin, or who said they really liked the book. Although one person thought that this was Jason Alexander who was going to be on the show.
Yeah, George Costanza.
Yeah, a common mistake actually. And unfortunately, I am not, and I'm not in fact Jason Alexander. But my mother did occasionally call me Jason Alexander, so if someone has made
I see.
that mistake, it is perfectly understandable.
There you go.
Jason for
Oh,
Justin
someone's
is
trying to
easy
buy
one.
it on Amazon, but they said it's sold out.
It is sold out. The one problem the book has is it had been too successful. It can't be too successful, but the one problem it has is it has in fact sold out. The both me and the publisher and everyone else has been blown away by how much support the book has gotten. So those of you who are trying to get copies, I really do appreciate your support, and I'm sorry you don't have one yet. There was a second print run that was ordered, I believe, 3 days after the book was released, because it was clear immediately that the initial print run, which was a very healthy, and the initial print run was already a very strong indication that the publisher believed in the book. But all of us have been blown away by the level of support, and like I say, I wish that people were able to get the book, but as problems go, this one is not. If I had to choose one problem, this would definitely be the problem I would choose.
Mm-hmm. Is there
And Devious Dungeons Painting is wondering, is there a PDF that people could, or some kind of EPUB that people could purchase in the meantime?
Ebooks are available. You can find them from pretty much. So the book is published through Page Street Publishing and Macmillan, so it has mainstream distribution. So it means that you're going to find ebooks every place and in every format that you typically find ebooks for big five publishing books. So Amazon, Kobo, those kind of places all have the book listed for ebook. There's even an audiobook from Tantor Media as well. The one drawback of some of those formats on some platforms is, of course, in some cases, graphics can be a little bit more difficult to communicate. But I have begun posting resources on my website, the Alexandrian, that include the maps and other resources that may not be as accessible in an ebook format, or may not be there at all if it's an audiobook, for example. So
yeah, I was about to say,
you won't miss out on anything if you get them in those formats.
An audiobook would be rough. Even with that, I feel like this seems like the kind of book you want to keep going back to and check certain sections at certain times. And to me, at least, that's not the same one I would want an audiobook, but that was the kind that maybe I would want an ebook and the physical book for.
Being able to search the text, I think it was going to be really useful. But like you said, being able to go back and reference over and over again definitely makes a lot of sense to me.
I'm just curious. I'm not going to share this with anyone, but I have access to sales figures, and I typed it in, and I have, so you want to be a game warden, so you want to be a producer, so you want to be a neuroscientist, so you want to be a ninja, so you want to be a lesbian, so you want to be a dog, so you want to be a librarian, you want to be a boss, a cowboy, a Viking, a coach, a scientist, a fashion, park ranger, a dictator, a princess, a knight, ventriloquist, lawyer, pro, superhero, principal, politician, Freemason, wizard, superintendent, teacher, pilot, physician, rock star, dog train, Roman soldier, ballet dancer.
Roman soldier?
So you want to be a frog, you want to be a marine, you want to be a stuntman, you want to be a witch.
Are they talking like ancient Roman soldier, or someone who's in Italy right now and is joining
you
the
want to be a
armed
marine,
services?
a leader, a cartoonist. There's a lot of these, but there's yours. I see it right here.
The best part is because it's a role-playing game, all of those books are technically supplements for mine. So.
Yeah, that's right. They're just expansions.
But yours is great because it's like, so you want to be a game master, everything you need to start your tabletop adventure for Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder, and other systems. Yours is the full title. Wow, you really did have good sales. Congratulations. Damn, these sales are good. I'm not going to tell what it is, but even I'm impressed. All right.
Well,
good job.
I got my first full sales report actually this morning. So with the actual numbers. So
yeah, I have.
I am also not going to say what they are. I'm
yeah,
not allowed to yet, but thank you.
Yes, as a publisher, I also get to see the numbers.
Yeah,
but
Steven only has
impressed.
the big box distribution numbers, not
everything. I don't have, but I can guess what the number is because I can do the math. But yes,
there's an extrapolation.
Yeah,
so Murtos gave it super chat. It said Murtos has been GMing for 40 years and was lucky enough to get the book, and it's a great resource. Says thank you, especially love the mystery chapter. I do use the audiobook and the real book. It's a great listen on my commute.
Yeah, I was going to say, Murtos, that I think the audiobook's great utility is that it's a great way, like if you're going someplace where the book will explode from humidity, that you're able to like listen to that first pass of it, but and then having that physical resource for the because there's all kinds of like mapping resources and adventure recipes and stuff that you're really going to want to be able to sit down with and tear into, I think, physically with the copy out in front of you. But there's a great balance there for having both of them.
Yeah, when I was looking at it, I saw Audiobook, and I was like, Audiobook? I was almost tempted. I'm like, that's going to be an interesting audiobook.
I'm fascinated by how it turned out. It was actually a bit of a surprise for me because the way the rights work, for those who don't know, is that because Pastry is publishing it, they basically have all the rights, and then they go and they negotiate translation rights. I saw someone asking about, will there be a Spanish translation? I know there are Spanish publishers who are interested in the translation rights. I don't think I don't think a deal has been made yet to actually secure those rights. If you or anyone else is interested in getting translations for this book or any other book that you really love, the best way to do that is actually not necessarily to write to the people currently publishing the book or certainly the author, but find local publishers in your language who do translated works. Write to them and tell them that you're interested in a translation, because the whole way that works is that the local company reaches out and says, hey, we'd like to do a translation, and that's how those translations get made. But I'd certainly love to see a Spanish translation of the book, definitely.
So all these people who say it's out of stock, what should they do?
So the book is out of stock currently. We mentioned there's ebooks available, and the audiobook obviously is currently available. The best thing you can do if you want to get your hands on a copy is to find some place that you trust to do a pre-order with, whether that's a local bookstore or Amazon or Blackwell's or whatever it might be. Place a pre-order and then hold that pre-order. And by the place that you trust, I mean find a place that you believe will make sure that the pre-orders are getting priority. There are some retailers where that's a little bit shakier, and they'll just hand the books off to anyone coming through the door. So you want to find some place that will actually honor that pre-order for you. So we have that second printing that's coming. I don't have a specific timeline on that yet. I will actually be making announcements about that in the future as soon as I have any information about that. But those will flow out, and based on what we've seen, those are going to hit retailers and distribution warehouses, and they're going to go to those pre-orders right away. So you want to have as much of a pre-order priority as you can if you want to get your hands on an actual physical copy of the book.
So there was two left at Amazon, and now they're gone.
Oh, it looks like this stream sold the last two that came back or something.
Well, you'll know this stream at least sold you 2 copies. So
the other thing you can also check out too, particularly if you're domestic US, I think, is Barnes and Noble, for example, is carrying the book, and so you may want to check with local stores and see if they have copies literally on the shelves. Like online retail is going to be the first place to be like, we don't have any anymore, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's not sitting on a shelf at your local bookstore.
Right.
And
if you have, as increasingly is becoming the case with people moving around the planet in different jobs and then keeping together with their gaming group and playing online on VTTs, if you have other group members whose local Barnes & Noble is a different Barnes & Noble and they're willing to scout it out for you, they might be able to find it on their shelf. I know that people have done that in the past for hard to find, like books or board games.
The other thing you can do is Barnes & Noble buys their own warehouse versions. So let's just say Barnes & Noble buys 1,000 copies. So if it's out of stock at Amazon because they have their own versions, that doesn't mean you can't get it at Barnes & Noble, because maybe Barnes & Noble has only, sold, we'll just say 700 copies. So they still have 300 copies in the warehouse. So you either order it and you'll get it right away if it's still in their warehouse, or it's still in their their store itself. So everyone has their own distribution channels. So Amazon has their own, Barnes & Noble has their own, and so forth. So I would just go to those bookstores and ask them directly, and you could probably still get it until it's really sold out, in which case you got to wait for the second printing. So there you go.
Another place you can also pre-order the book as well is actually a local game store. I know ACD Distribution has been carrying it and again, domestically in the States. And they're sold out now as of about a week and a half ago, I believe, as well. The distribution center has shipped all their copies to local stores. I know some local stores still, again, have them on shelves. But because of that being kind of a different distribution channel, it's possible ACD Distribution will get copies out to local stores faster when the second print run comes through. So also, if you want to support your local game store, also a place you can tell them, hey, can you pre-order this book for me?
Well, it's Someone wants to know if there's going to be a hardcover or a spiral version because it's so damn thick.
No plans for any other editions, physical editions at this time. That's all up to the publisher. So again, if you want to let them know you'd love to see a hardcover edition, track down Page Three Publishing and send them a polite note telling them that you'd love to see a hardcover edition of the book. And if there's enough demand for it, they see enough people interested in that, I would certainly love to have a hardcover copy on my shelf. So,
yeah, Mark, you'll be happy. MIT Press bookstore still has some in stock.
Ooh,
There we go.
there you go.
My alma mater, is keeping up with the biggest hits.
Well, they know their audience. I wonder if Mike.
Yeah, well,
I wonder
that's
if
for sure.
Mellon
You know,
bookstore has it.
surprisingly, I'm sure things may have changed since I've been there, since it's been a while. When I was there, it was very difficult to get a tabletop role-playing club, by which I mean our group tried multiple times and failed because there was a LARPing club, the Assassin's Guild. And so the student government was like, well, there's already that. That's the same thing as tabletop role-playing. And so we tried again, and we got an affidavit from the Assassin's Guild being like, we are not the same as tabletop role playing. And we proposed. They said, well, you know, there's a board game club, and the board game club at MIT has in their charter that they also include board games, card games, and all games. And surely you are and all games. And we were like, yeah, but football is also and all games.
I was literally going to say. So does football run through that club?
Yeah, then we got an affidavit from the tabletop. Sorry, not the tabletop. From the board game group. They were not meaning to automatically include tabletop RPGs. When they said in all games, they meant like other things that are in the board game umbrella. And so then we went again, and they were like, look, we just don't want to have another organization because that requires funding, and we're not sure you speak for every tabletop role player at MIT. And we were like, of course we don't speak for everyone yet because we don't have an organization. We speak for everyone that we found. We're trying to find more people. And then we gave up. So maybe someone has succeeded in the intervening, in the intervening decades. But
that's the saddest geek story I've ever heard.
You thought you were doing a tabletop role-playing game, but you were actually doing Kafka. So
that is... That's so sad and yet pathetic and geeky all at the same time. Anyhow, well, we kind of jumped around because normally we do a little bit of news. And for those who are new to Roll for Combat, welcome. I am the publisher. We are a weird hybrid of hard news and publishing. It's like, I don't know how we got into both of those, but actually I do know how we got into both of those, because tomorrow at 8 p.m. both Mark and I are going to go through the history of the OGL. It's the 1-year anniversary when Mark and I broke the story. We were the first ones. Yes, I know everyone thinks Linda Codega did it. We beat them by 1 day. Linda Codega, thank God, verified everything that we broke, because a lot of people didn't believe us and they thought we were terrorists.
To be fair, we're talking about broke the story that it exists. There were several people who mentioned it before we did, such as
but they didn't have the same...
Boy and others. I think Griffin Saddlebag.
You're
there
right.
were several others, but they
Boy. He's on too,
they were worried to reveal the exact text. We were, if we want to be specific, and we will in tomorrow's episode.
Yes,
we are the first place that revealed quotes from the text that we found incredibly alarming.
Yes, we were the first ones to truly go public.
And the very next day, Linda Codega did.
Yes.
And that's great because nobody believed it from us. So it's good that
not nobody. It was
okay. Most people didn't at least fully believe it. They were just like, this channel is not even that big of a channel. Why would they have received it? And also, this text is so insulting and doesn't seem like normal legal text. It seems like very conversational. So even if it was advisory commentary text, there's no way it's real.
Right. I know that for me personally, like I remember when I first started hearing whispers about this in mid-December of 2021. I was like, I dismissed it because I was like, there's no way they'd be that stupid. And then it turned out. But then so I know like Indestructor Boy, who is in chat right now. Hello. Like he released it, and I was still like, "There's no way they can't possibly be that stupid." Sorry, Instructor Boy, I totally should have believed you. But then you guys breaking it was the point where I was like, "Okay, wait a minute, what's going on?" So it was like a dam being chipped away. Like it was like, "Oh no, this isn't what's happening." And then of course the deluge of reality hit everybody, I think.
Well, tomorrow we're going to go through one. I wrote down everything because I want to preserve it for history, because there's a lot that happened, and we were in the center of most of it. I wouldn't say all, but almost all of it, most of it.
We were somewhere around just a surprisingly large amount of things.
Stunningly large amount. The tip of the spear, as I would say. We were always at the right place at the right time, which was kind of stunning and whatever. So I have it all written down. I want to preserve it for history. But more importantly, there was a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff that no one knows about that I'm going to talk about now that a year has gone by, and I think we're okay. And some people didn't want me to talk about, but I'm going to tell you some secret back-channeling, talk about things I was talking about with other people, how we were coordinating, how we coordinated the D&D Begone. I'll tell you about the whispers in the campaign, what we were planning in Gen Con 2022, believe it or not, because we had a feeling something like this was happening, and I was starting to hear whispers as early as then. And there's a lot of things I'll be able to tell you that
because a lot of people were hearing in December, but even in Gen Con there were worries that were going around, but they were vague, but there were enough of them if you really had enough industry context to know that there could be something pretty concerning. But even then I didn't believe that it was as bad as it actually turned out to be.
Yeah, well, I mean, you could see our reactions live because it happened live on our show, and you can see how we reacted. But tomorrow we're going to do a retrospect, and we'll go through it all. And you guys can join us. We can talk to about it. And what is the saying? It's like they won, but so did we. So there we go. We're all going to be winners tomorrow. So
that's super exciting. I'm super excited about that video because way back when the thing was first breaking, I actually released a video on my channel called The History of the OGL, which was the history of the OGL up to that point. And so I get emails all the time from people being like, "You're going to do a history video of like the whole fiasco?" And I'm like, maybe someday, but that sounds like a lot of work. So I'm glad you guys are tackling that work.
Yeah.
I'll be able to point people to that video.
Well, I had a talk at Gen Con with Ryan Dancy about it. And so I put it together because, I needed to have it organized. And then tomorrow's the anniversary, so I figured let's preserve it once and for all in all of its history of the dates, the times, exactly what happened when, so that no one forgets. And I wanted to, and Mark and I were literally there, so we can give our perspective of what was happening. And, there's a lot of people who are reporting on it, but there was only a very small handful of people who were right in the mix, and we are one of them. So I thought it would be important for prosperity that we get it out so it's not forgotten. So, and it might come out and be imported later this year. We will see how they handle whatever their new license is. So, anyhow, tomorrow at 8 p.m. here, it'll just be Mark and I. We're going to go through that. But today, if you have any...
We have a couple other topics before we get into the top GMing tips.
Well, the first one I want to talk about is how I kind of met Alexander. Or Justin, sorry. Your first name is a last name, so... Yeah. I'm sure you're used to that. So how I met Justin indirectly is because Dungeon Masterpiece wrote me, while I was in Colombia and said, "Hey, do you want to help me do a stream?" I'm like, "What are you talking about?" It's like, "I'm going to be making a 365 room dungeon on New Year's in 10 hours. And I'm like, "Okay." Now, I vaguely remember this because this was very hot in December 2022, where there was a, challenge to do a dungeon a day or a dungeon room a day to make a 365 room dungeon. And then promptly on January 4th, that sucked all the air out of the room because OGL took over everything. And so this kind of went away. And he's like, "Let's do it." And I ended up being the anchor because he knows how fast I work. I ended up doing 131 rooms with him and finishing it. And I wrote the boss. and that was insanity, especially towards the end. But you were on it too. What did you think, Justin?
I was. It was a ton of fun. Yeah, the original Dungeon 23 challenge was, I think Sean McCoy of Mothership
Yeah, it
fame
is.
came up with the original challenge, and I know a handful of people who actually did the every day for the whole year thing.
Oh my
When
god.
Baron came up with his whole let's do it all in one day, sounded insane and fun, and I think it was really great that he invited so many people to come join him on that insane journey. But really great example of how like what a great creative improvisation technique just having a blank dungeon map can be, and saying like here's a blank map, let's fill it with something. And how you can take inspiration from just the geography of even a random map to inspire you to create things that you would never think to create without that inspiration.
Well, so everyone was on for either half an hour, an hour, and I came on at 5 p.m. and it had to end at 8 p.m. one way or the other because there's a 12-hour limit of streaming on YouTube. So it was ending that way, one way or the other. And he's like, "All right, Steve, we're up to 177." we have to finish, but then it was 1 hour. I'm like, dude, we're never gonna do. I'm like, I'm fast, but I don't even think you could type fast enough to finish whatever. How many rooms is that? 190-ish rooms in 1 hour. But we got about 50 rooms in an hour, and then we started to call in the cavalry, and I started to call in more people, and then Kelsey Dion, we got her to come on, and she helped out, and then everyone was jumping in. Anyone who had the link was jumping in and helping. And then by the very end, should have done that at the beginning. We all started to enter in our own rooms. We each took a room, and then we wrote
awesome.
what we wanted to be in the room. So it was like 5 of us working on it simultaneously, and we got it done. So that was it was quite an experience. It was quite a way to end the year, because it was like we started with the OGL, which was extremely exciting, especially for us, and then I ended the year with designing 171 rooms in a dungeon, which was very exciting for me too. So yeah, I don't even know what actually I know the beginning part, because I told a little story. I had a whole story of like the goblin conversion area and where they hung out, and we gave them like a racetrack, and I gave them like a sound like something I would do, Mark. I gave a goblin racetrack where they would race and have baby basilisks like chase them around the racetrack, and you either won or got eaten. And then I had like a poker room, and we had like dart throwing room, and like we had all these, like it was like the goblin hangout area, the goblin club. It was really fun. And then after that, I don't even remember. It's all a fuzzy haze.
It's a blur.
It was
beyond
a blur
that.
after that.
In our section, we discovered the cult that had inadvertently created lycanthropy and released it on the world.
Cool.
And so that's lurking in there somewhere as well. I think he said he was going to plan to put it all together and then release it on itch.io. So
he is. I told him, and or we could just. I told him I could do it on Roll for Combat under, Battlezoo.com under free, either one or both, whatever. He has to clean it up a little. He was like too tired. Although we did cheat, because we didn't quite make it, and I said there's for like 50 of the rooms there
have to be bathrooms.
No, better.
Oh, okay.
There was a thing that went off the map, and then we said rooms like 322 to 364. You add these rooms from your own dungeon as the dungeon master, and then 365 was the boss room. We were like, close enough.
That's a classic technique. B3, Palace of the Silver Princess, was classic for being like, I don't know, add more rooms over here.
Yeah. I always see dungeons that do that, and by the way, I always hate it, but they're always like, oh yeah, here, just add your own stuff. It's outside the scope of this adventure, but feel free to add whatever you want. And I was like,
I give it a pass in the original version of Palace of the Silver Princess, because it's a training module for like basic D&D back in the day. And so it really was like, no, here's your starter 3 levels of the mega dungeon, and then the process as described in the rule books is you keep adding more levels. So here are the connections. But other than that one, I'm like, yeah, look, guys, you don't have to leave empty corridors there, because if I want to add more stuff, I can always just erase a wall and then add it. I'm a big boy. I can figure that out. But I want a complete product.
Do either of you remember the Dungeon a Day? Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I bought that. I actually was part of Dungeon a Day. Who was that by? That was by was that Monty Cook? Yeah, it was
That was
Monty
Monty
Cook.
Cook. Yeah, I was also an early supporter. I'm a huge Monty Cook fan in general.
Yeah.
And have a whole set of it sitting on my hard drive.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Crazy project.
That was crazy. Well, that was also back in the day when mega dungeons were starting to turn really big. It was like, and I remember that Dungeon a Day was really a cool idea, and I supported it, and then it just went away. I don't know what happened to it. It just disappeared one day. Did he ever do anything with that? I wonder. Or...
No, so Monty Cook was doing it for many years, and then it was so the model for those not familiar with it was a subscription service. Everyone subscribed to. It was like it was Patreon in some ways. We were basically paying Monty Cook to create something, and apparently the subscribers kind of dropped off. He eventually ended up selling it to a different company, and I'm going to forget the name of the company now. Nope, it's gone. But he sold it to a different company who then ended up releasing the last few levels with other creators doing it. And I think, but I don't know. I think that company might be gone as well now, or at the very least, I don't think they have. They don't have the. I don't think they have the Dungeon a Day stuff available anywhere for people to buy. Unfortunately.
No. You see, that's the problem.
What was the name?
Just disappears into the ether forever if you don't have like an actual physical product. Sometimes it's just sad.
Was it Super Genius?
Super Genius. Yeah, that was it. It was Owen. Yeah. But I don't think it's available anymore because I remember looking for it a few years back to link people to it, and it wasn't available then. It may be available now.
It looks like it closed down in 2019.
Yeah.
Is oh wait, did Owen have it?
I thought they'd just package it up and like make it available other places when it was done, but
Owen has it. I'm kind of surprised Owen didn't just like package it up and sell it on a store.
Maybe the terms of the license didn't allow it to. Like I know some people, because it was also like Wolfgang Barr before Cobalt Press was Cobalt Press. That was open design, and they had a similar crowdfund a book before crowdfunding was a thing. And the first couple of those books you literally cannot get because there was a promise that they'd only ever be available to the backers of the program, and people quickly figured out that was actually a terrible idea from many standpoints. But there's a couple of those that Wolfgang Barr is like, no, we can't re-release them because we promised the people who funded them that we would not do that. And one of those is very much on my. I would love to track down a copy someday because I came to Open Design too late to get it, but almost impossible to find those.
So I remember seeing all of those. No, actually, it looks like this Dungeon a Day went down on April 2012.
Wow!
And that I had a cached version of the announcement that was later. So I just found it on an EN World announcement.
So another thing is that two big stories broke. One a few days ago and one last week, but both of them I think are incredibly relevant. And I talk about both. One is the artist lawsuit alleges that Midjourney scraped copyrighted Magic the Gathering art to train AI. There's basically an ongoing lawsuit against Midjourney, Stability AI, and DeviantArt that shows thousands of artist names that the plaintiffs assert that had their artwork scraped from the internet and fed into Midjourney's image diffusion tool as training fodder. And it includes dozens, if not hundreds, of artists who, of course, have worked in Magic the Gathering in the past. And as of November 29th, there's over 4,700 artist names that are claiming that they took their copyrighted material and used it to train the AI, which is illegal. And on top of that, and this was big news. This one I've been following, which I don't think anyone's really talking about in our world, but they really should, is that New York Times is suing OpenAI and Microsoft for infringing on copyrighted works. Now, OpenAI are the creators of ChatGPT, and they're worth approximately $80 billion right now. And what makes this even more interesting is that New York Times was working with ChatGPT to have them write articles for them. And the talks broke down, and now instead of working with them, they're suing them. And they have very strong examples of exhibits of where ChatGPT took copyrighted New York Times articles and changes one or two words, but otherwise it's identical. The text is the exact same, and they have lots of examples of this. which is illegal. And it all comes down to that, yes, we've been talking a lot about these, AIs and people starting to lose their job to AI. There was a huge gut of firings in the gaming journalistic space where a lot of people were fired recently and their jobs were literally replaced with AI. There's been artists that are being let go, and we're hearing more and more about how companies are going to be using AI art, and they are not apologetic about it whatsoever. And I knew this was going to happen. Is that, are the people like us going to be able to do anything about this? No. But are the people like the New York Times and Microsoft and Google and people who really have some power and have some money and deep pockets and can't be outsued, they will go after each other because, and the funny thing is, they're going after Microsoft, they being New York Times, because they were trying to work with them to have them use ChatGPT, but it failed, so now they're suing them instead. So it's not like they were the good guys in this all along, but it's all about money. And if they can't figure out how to make money off of it because their subscriptions have been down, then they're going to sue them and make sure no one can make money off of it. And
yeah, they were like, pay us X amount or we'll sue, basically, what I understand. And they did not want to pay X amount.
Yeah.
Mirtos gave a super chat. They know someone, a Magic the Gathering artist, who is involved in the Magic the Gathering lawsuit.
Yeah.
And like, I saw, which obviously could have been fake because it was just a screenshot. What looked like it was a screenshot of somebody like saying that they did use Magic the Gathering art, but I'm not sure what the provenance of that is, so it's that I'm going to be following that pretty closely.
So, by the way, the people keep saying that WoTC won't use AI art because it isn't copyrightable. That's actually not true. What you do is you use AI art, and then you change it, and now it's copyrightable. So you can basically have AI art do 99% of the art, and then they change one thing, and now it's theirs. So that does not totally stand. AI art by itself is not copyrightable. AI art, as long as you modify it a certain percentage, is now copyrightable.
And the courts are going to have to decide what that percentage is, because as far as I know, nobody has ever gotten them to make a definitive ruling on that.
Correct.
It's kind of the invert of how companies like Conan Properties Incorporated, for example, manages to maintain some hold over stories that should be in the public domain, is that they will release new updated versions of the stories in some way. In the case of CPI, they use it by going, we went back to Robert E. Howard's original manuscripts. So the Weird Tales versions that were published during his lifetime, those are in the public domain. But we have these. Make sure if you reprint the story that you don't accidentally use the wrong version, or we will come and hit you with a hammer.
Well, that's exactly why Disney keeps coming out with these live versions of their stories. They come out with Pinocchio and Dumbo and Lion King because, well, we just found out that Disney Steamboat Willie just came out of copyright because it's been 95 years and they ran out of appeals.
Did Tigger come out the other day? Because Winnie the Pooh was a while ago, but Tigger wasn't in the first Winnie the Pooh. And I think Tigger came out the other day because a slight amount of time has passed and it may have reached the first point when Tigger appeared the right number of years ago.
Yeah, we're running into this really fascinating thing too with the intersection of how character-based copyright works, because for the longest time it wasn't significant, but in the late 20th century there emerged this legal theory of copyright in a character separate from the copyright of the individual work, and that has not really been legally tested about what that means in terms of how it relates to the public domain, because there just hasn't been cases like Mickey Mouse or Sherlock Holmes is another example of this. There have been a lot of cases of this where you're beginning to see a transition from what works are in the public domain versus what works on in the public domain, and what does that mean for the copyright of the character. So it's this next few years / decades are going to be real interesting to see what happens to copyright and how these cases come out.
Well, what happened is copyright was originally 26 years in America. Doing this off memory, so just bear with me.
28. But
28, or thank you. It was either 20, I couldn't remember, 28, 26. And then you could extend it another 28. And then there was an act of Congress in the 70s, which added 20 years to the copyright, which they called the Mickey Mouse Act or something, but it actually affected a lot of people. And then they added another 20 years, and then it was up to 95
They added
years.
another 20 years in 1998, right? Because it was
Right.
20 years after the last one with
Right.
the Copyright Extension Act.
Right.
And that was Sonny Bono, actually.
Right. That was Sonny Bono.
Yep.
And what ended up happening is, I think why they stopped is, first of all, they're going to trademarks and they're going to other ways to protect their material. But more importantly, other countries like Europe, I think it's 95 years and that's it. And they're not extending it. So they knew there's really almost no point in changing in America because they'll just get, ripped to shreds, because now it's worldwide and people just, form a company in Europe and then say, we can use it. So I think they're trying to now do other things, such as continuously release new material on old material. Like, for example, it's no coincidence that Steamboat Willie animation has been in all the recent Disney movies. I don't know if you saw that. That's like the little bumper, and it's always Steamboat Willie. I was like, I wonder why they're doing that. Oh, I know why they're doing that. They want to try to make sure it's relevant and it's in the current movies.
They're trying to use trademark to protect what they can't protect through copyright anymore.
Right.
And there's been mixed success with that in the court cases so far. Like Sherlock Holmes Estate and Conan Properties Incorporated, a few others have tried using trademark in this way. And sometimes they're successful and sometimes they're not. I think the biggest thing is, of course, that you can use Steamboat Willie in many ways, but the real question of whether or not you can use it or not is, do you want to pay the legal fees when Disney comes with a nuisance suit to make it expensive for you? And that'll be the real test.
Right. But it's, as you said, the next couple of years, we're going to start seeing things coming out of copyright that we all are still aware of. That's like, Superman in about, in 30, when did Superman come in? 1933. So what's that, in 2027, 28, approximately? That's coming out of copyright. And oh man, that's going to be...
Well, it's fascinating because some people are like, why don't you just create new stuff? I'm like, because for the entire history of humanity, we've had the ability to have a shared mythology. We have stories about Hercules. We have stories about Romeo and Juliet. We have stories about all of these different sort of communal characters that grow and develop communally through our art. But then you get to the 20th century and the entire mythology of the 20th century is locked behind these legal doors. And it is a stunting of culture. Like, obviously, as a creator of, a book, many books, I believe in authors and writers having the legal right to earn a living from their income. And the way to do that is, in fact, copyright. But I don't agree that we need to lock down our entire culture for multiple generations the way that we have.
So I was actually wrong. Superman is 2033. So I guess I knew it was a 33. I couldn't remember if it was 1933, 2033. Yeah, but but the thing is, they're gonna say it's like, well, it's a very specific version of Superman because he didn't fly back then and he didn't have these colors, and and they're gonna make sure of that because
he weirdly did some pretty evil stuff in some of that early things, like beating up on poor people for no reason.
Well,
like seriously,
his earliest, Batman did that. Superman was actually, in his earliest stuff, he was actually fighting like capitalists and joining union movements. And then as he becomes more and more mainstream, there's less and less joining unions.
Yeah, he did unions at the beginning. Then he they shifted it around, and there have been ones where he just beats up people on the street, like for being there, and then complains about the fact that they shouldn't be on the street. Like it's very political when people are in charge, and watching as different writers write these comic book characters is similar to the previous generation's mythical heroes, or like the thesis of one of my former coworkers who's now at WoTC was that Arthurian characters are basically the comic books of those era, and so you would just watch new authors from new countries be like, our new knight that we're writing, Lancelot, I create 10 to 12, I'm going to write it. He's the best. These other previous knights from the old legend, they're not great. And then everybody would just add a new one from their country who was the real best knight. And it's similar, but now it's locked into the company that owns the copyright instead of anybody being able to do it and write and expand the universe.
Well, there's some weird legacy stuff too. Like, one of the reasons why Sherlock Holmes is such a popular character, in my opinion, is that, and especially an enduring character, is because he actually did fall out of copyright before. Some of his stories fell out of copyright earlier because he didn't get caught by those 72 and 95 extensions of copyright. And so he was the last major public domain character that was released into the public domain. And you couldn't go any newer than that. So Sherlock Holmes was where it was at. for decades now, and it's only just now that we're beginning to see new stuff of significance drop back into the public domain as well.
So it's interesting is over the break, I was watching, I don't know if you watch Death Battle on YouTube. I just discovered it, and it's basically they take, two super insane people up against each other. And this one, they had Groku from Dragon Ball Z versus DC Comics Superman, and who would win. And they use everything. Like, if it ever existed in history of all time, like, they would use it. And according to this, I believe it was Superman 1. Superman, with his like godlike powers, he could fly across the universe in 8 seconds.
Silver Age Superman by the 60s was absolutely nuts. He was basically God.
Oh yeah, no, he wasn't even God. He was past God. I mean, it was like he could fly across the universe, and that's the thing. Grogu, and they is powerful, but
Steven,
he ain't that powerful.
Goku, right?
Goku. I keep saying Grogu because I keep thinking of the Mandalorian. So, Goku. Sorry, they're so similar. But yeah, you should check that out. They have funny ones because they had like they had Homelander versus a whole bunch of people. They have like the most powerful people ever against each other. The good one was James Bond versus John Wick, and because they're like almost human, not quite. That was a very even match, but yeah. But when you see them, because they use, I don't know how they figure this out. They use everything ever written about that character in history, and they go to the upper extreme of like how powerful they are. So if it was mentioned even once, oh, you know what they had? That was my favorite one. They had Popeye versus One Punch Man. and that was a good. You're like, come on, because One Punch Man never loses. Well,
yeah.
I
would have thought that One Punch Man would win because of the fact that Popeye is possibly not going to have his spinach at the beginning.
Nope,
so...
they explained that he can will it at whenever he wants, and because he has cartoon rules, he can't die. So even though he beats him in the beginning, he just wills himself back into existence, and it's very well done because they animate it. And then One Punch Man's actually excited because he's like, "Oh my god, it's challenge!" He's like, he's very excited about this fight, and Popeye just like creams him. So anyhow, I would strongly recommend you check that out if you haven't. It's been around for like 10 years. I never even heard of it, but I was like binging it while I was on vacation because I was like, oh my god, this is like,
I'm still not real sure about Popeye versus...
Watch it, because he uses every power that Popeye has.
It feels like to me the fact that both Superman beat Goku and Popeye beats One Punch Man,
they break it down
to indicate to me that the Western character is being favored in these matchups.
Well,
I don't know, Steven.
They basically explain it, and the main thing is that Popeye has come back from disintegration and utter annihilation. And they show how. And so basically, anything that's happened, they can use, and they use that. And more importantly, he has cartoon rules, and cartoon rules don't work. Like, there was even a cartoon rule where he came out and punched out his animator, or he went into the audience during a movie to get spinach. It's like
I think one key thing here is the real difference is that like a lot of people were taking LSD in the 60s and then writing things and publishing them.
There you go.
And so you end up with some really crazy stuff. And
it was crazy.
And like the last anime in the last 30 years has had like a ceiling, a limit, which like, no, that would be crazy to do that. And the 60s people were like, no man, like I took some shrooms and I saw it, so Superman can fly across the universe in 8 seconds and has a vision that allows him to build walls. He just looks at things and walls grow there.
I saw exactly. I would strongly recommend, Mark, you would like it, because that's exactly why I started. I couldn't stop watching because I'm like, oh, come on, can this guy really beat that guy? And then they go through it. Oh, they had another one. They had Galactus versus, who was that one? That one was fantastic too. Exactly. This is like geek heaven. It's like these are things you would talk about with your friends. See, we could get into this forever, but we can't. Galactus versus.
Yeah. So let's move on to the real main topic.
While I look that up, you wrangled the cats there, Mark.
Wrangle the cats. Okay. So we're heading over to the main topic, which is amazing GM tips from award-winning author Justin Alexander, and the sort of thumbnail said there were going to be 5, so we should do at least 5 total tips.
Galactus vs. Unicron.
I was
from Transformers.
to everyone in a sense, I was not consulted about the title of this video, so I take no responsibility for the quality of the tips that are about to come.
You have a 544 page book. Are you saying there's not 5 tips in this book?
I guess you probably find a couple of things in here.
I mean, it's like I just felt like I said 500 tips from.
Yeah, it's not like you were the 365 tips for.
Yeah, it wasn't. I'm like 365 tips.
365 tips. We should do that. We could do that.
Actually, that would be a good stream, even though I just jokingly suggested it. I'm serious, but
we could 100% do that.
Yep. I mean, I do it, but not today.
Not today.
Well, I think people should feel free to jump in chat too and ask for tips about specific things. We can maybe guide things a little bit that way as well.
Yes. What is, if you would say, I know you wrote some tips down after you read that title and said, "Oh crap, Steve, what you do to me?" Is there like a couple of really good tips that you think that would work for everyone who's beginner? Like, so I've been GMing almost weekly since '77, and I read these books, and I'm gonna definitely read yours, but as I was saying before the stream, it's like I can think of a million things that I use, but I probably couldn't put it down in writing, which is probably why Professor DM like bookmarked his like crazy, because I'll probably forget this as soon as I read it. But, you know, is there anything you can think of that'd be really good for people like myself who have been doing this for a very, very long time and feel like they know everything, but I'm sure I don't, you know? It's like there's always something you can learn, so...
Well, I think let's start with the real simple one, which is actually a tip I picked up from somebody else. It's actually a blogger named Neil Krishnaswamy, and he referred to it as the law of the conservation of NPCs. And so I referred to it as Neil Krishnaswamy's law of the conservation of NPCs. And the basic idea is that whenever you are either prepping a scenario, prepping for a session, or you are running at the table and you need to introduce a new NPC for some reason, maybe the PCs are looking for someone who can sell them a magic item, or maybe they're looking for information down in the docks, or maybe you're looking for like who the new villain's going to be in the next scenario. Whatever the case might be, whenever you need to introduce a new NPC, or if you're introducing a new conflict into the game, see if an existing NPC can be integrated into that role instead of defaulting to introducing a new NPC. And there's a couple of reasons why you want to do this. First, it helps keep the size of your cast of characters kind of under control for the campaign, which helps both you and the players kind of keep track of things and be more on top of things, as opposed to having this sort of ephemeral content that comes in and disappears and you never think about it again. The other thing too is that as you reuse these NPCs, those NPCs begin developing sort of multiple facets over time. They're not simple. Even if you introduce an NPC as a simple one-note character who does the one thing or whatever, when you come back and add them in a new context, they begin becoming, just by default, a more multifaceted character, a deeper and more interesting character. And of course, on that same note, the players begin developing long-term relationships with these NPCs, either positive or negative or both. And all of that results in a richer and more involved experience at the table. So it's a very simple kind of tip/rule, Neil Krishnaswamy's law of the conservation of NPCs. So that could be our first tip of the stream.
There you go. It's interesting thing in narrative altogether, where there's always like wind up being more connections among the characters, and readers often enjoy what the twist where it's like, oh, this person was actually this person as well.
Mm-hmm.
And Stephen, I think a tip specifically for you, given your situation, similar to something Jimmy Rapine put into chat, is that once you're like, I've done it for 40 years, I feel like I know everything. The best advice is that practice certainly gives you a lot of opportunities to see a lot of things, but it doesn't always make perfect. It definitely does make something permanent, or at least ingrains it in more. So it's possible, even after a lot of years, that there's one or two things that it's just always been the way that you've done it, but that there could be a better way to do it, and it's been fine for your group. But that, so always be open to new things is I would say, one my top tip for someone who's done it for however many years. Even myself, I've done it for not nearly as many as Steven, but a lot of years. And always be open to hearing a new idea or a new way of doing something, and think about whether it could be better than the way that you find to be good enough to do it that way right now.
I think some of us who have these long-term GMs can also default to kind of running all of our games the same way. We become comfortable with that. And so we kind of end up taking whatever RPG it is and kind of forcing it into our matrix. And I certainly do believe, having written a book to that effect, that there are a lot of things about being a GM, a lot of skills and a lot of arts of being a game master that transfer across systems. But I do know that when I first pick up a new game, like Night's Black Agents by Kenneth Hyde or Blades in the Dark by John Harper, for example, that I will make a point of like making sure I understand it and doing exactly what that game tells me to do for at least a few sessions, because that's the point where I discover new things from running those different games. It's how I discovered like Blades in the Dark, how they handle factions. Night's Black Agents has its Conspiramid, which is a very powerful tool. And so by going, I'm going to do what they tell me to do explicitly for a few sessions. That's when I learn new stuff. And sometimes after that, I'm like, okay, I didn't actually like that. I'm either going to play a different game or I'm going to tweak this game to be something I like. But more often than not, it becomes a tool that's not just useful for that game, but that then I can adapt to other systems as well, and my toolbox grows.
That's exactly how I approach it too. With one exception, which is if I find something in a game that looks like it is like literally non-functional in my best reading of it, I'll bring it to the rest of my group. And if they also are like, yeah, this is either non-functional or degenerate, if you run it that way, it's just like instantly gonna win or lose the situation, or it doesn't make any sense to any of us, then we'll all agree with some regret, because we do want to run things the way that they are, at least at first, to see how it was like possibly intended, to adjust in advance.
So I'm curious, one thing I always want to know about, and I always ask everyone this, I've asked a lot of designers about this, and I'm warning you, I didn't read your full book yet, so I don't know if it's in here. And no one ever seems to have a very good answer for this one, is character death. Do you have something in here about character death and how to handle that?
I don't. I don't think there's. I don't think there's anything. I don't think anything made the book on character death.
Okay.
And now you say that,
we have an exclusive now.
Yeah. Probably should be a bit heavy on that. So I remember way back in the day, I was on Usenet back in the 90s on the old RPG Usenet groups back then.
ARPANET, Usenet, those were fun days.
Yeah. And I remember that was the first place I encountered the concept of PCs having script immunity, that the GM would actually protect the PCs and not allow them to die. And boy, that was a very controversial topic back then. It's a very controversial topic now. But it was one of the first examples for me personally where there was this sort of debate about what is the right way to do things. It was the first time I came to the realization, well, there's not a one true way. It kind of depends on what your goals are for a particular game, for a particular campaign, for a particular table. And so the question of like, what do you do with character death varies a lot depending on all those factors. So there are times when I'll play games where basically the PCs do have script immunity and they can't die, and we all understand that. And that in some games that won't work, like literally some little like mechanics of games that won't work because the game's mechanics are predicated on the fact that you are risking death. And if you aren't risking death, you have to make changes to the actual mechanics to make that work. And there's ways to do that, obviously. I tend to play with death on the table, though, because I think those are important stakes. But I think understanding one trap you can fall into with this, I'm going to ramble a little bit here. One trap you can fall into this with, you'll hear people say things like, well, if death isn't on the table, if the PCs can't die, then there's nothing at stake. And whether PC death is on the table or not, one thing to really understand as a dungeon master is that if death is the only thing that's at stake, you are leaving a lot out of your game that is probably far more important than the question of whether you live or die. And it suggests that the only thing that your players care about at the table is their own personal character. And that is also something that's going to be limiting your gaming. You have to get to a point where there's more things at stake in your campaign, their friends, their families, the things they want the world to be, the things they fear the world could become, that you want all of those things to be at stake. And you don't necessarily need character death to be on the table for those things to be true. But it is true that if the only thing that is at stake is, are you going to die or not, Like the worst, most degenerate case of this that you can see is the only thing that's at stake is whether or not you will die, and also I'm fudging the dice roll so you can't die. Because then what are we even doing here? Like nothing's at stake at that point. There's nothing at risk. There's nothing that is in flux or debate that we are discovering through play. And so that's the state I would recommend people generally avoid. Is if you are going to take death off the table, I think it's good to openly know that as a whole table to let your players know, hey, we're going to be doing something different here. And then secondly, you want to make sure that if that is off the table, that you have something else that you're replacing it with. And then the other side of that question, of course, is like, if characters do die, what do you do next? And that's kind of a whole separate topic that we can dive into too.
Right. So whether to include death or not, I think I'm in the same ballpark as you on this one, Justin. I usually do include it, but I'm also very much of the opinion that killing the character now, if you think that's the only way to make there be stakes, even for an extremely selfish player who just doesn't care about anyone else in their group, any NPCs in their backstory or the world, then I think you could be more creative than that. Because even those selfish players have things that they would hate to have happen to them, maybe even more than having their characters die.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's important to have a discussion with your group, a candid discussion, figure out what people want. There are those groups out there. They're not like my group. It sounds like they're not like Justin's group, but that are just like, yeah, we don't want there to be any stakes. We literally don't, because it's stressful and our life is stressful enough. We're here to do a beer and pretzels style game. We just want to fight some monsters that definitely won't kill us. Like maybe at most, like we'll be pushed back and have to try again. And just do something real chill and do something that's less stressful or something like that. And that is okay if that's your group. It's not my group. My group does want to have some kind of a stakes when we play, but that's a completely reasonable way to do things too.
Yeah, I mean,
well, the other way you can also fall into this too is through linear adventure design, or like very linear adventure design. Let's say railroading. We'll just go for the broken case of linear design.
I call it roller coastering because it's more fun.
Yeah, but you run into a problem there where, like, okay, if you've designed a railroad or a roller coaster where the outcome is known before you start, then you do have a thing where there are no stakes. If you have to have if encounter A has to have the outcome of B so that then C can happen, that the D can happen, then you run into the difficulty where what is actually at stake. Because much like saying, like, I'm just going to pretend that you guys could die, you run into that same problem with that kind of linear thing. And it really traps you as a game master when you trap yourself on that roller coaster, that the only outcome is we go through the roller coaster, we end up back where we started, or we go through the roller coaster, wherever the roller coaster is taking us. But nothing's actually at stake because there's never anything that's actually at risk. It's the difference between playing poker at a Las Vegas casino with real money on the line and playing poker where you're like, well, there's no bets. I mean, that's the difference. And you can have fun both ways, but they are in many ways different experiences.
I semi disagree because I only run adventure paths with my group, and these guys have been playing with me forever. I mean, these guys have been playing since the 70s as well.
Those tend to have stakes, though, Stephen. A lot of them do.
Right, but that's what I was going to say. It was like, it is an adventure path, and it is semi-linear, but I put stakes in there, and I was going to say, it's like, you just have to know your group, because, like, they were fighting, what are those things with the three heads in Pathfinder?
Berberai with three heads?
With the that spit acid that look like
Mukrati?
Mukrati. They're fighting two Mukrati, not one.
Yeah, that's a really rough encounter. Mukrati are very powerful, and if you fight two,
unbelievably powerful. And my guys were like, awesome. This is like certain death, probably a TBK, hardest monster in the game, fighting two of them at once. The monk with 250 hit points almost one-shotted, and they're like, good. Like, they were super excited. They woke up, they're sitting upright in their seats, like, they like the stakes. They like that there's, like, this is a near death, this is like it's like playing Dark Souls, to them. Like, that's what they like to play. And that's the type of game they enjoy. But they've also been playing for a long time, and they also know that I will figure out a way for us to continue the adventure if they all die. We'll figure out a way, whether they come back and there's a heavy price to pay, and their characters are different, or they literally are resurrected by someone else, you know. I mean, we'll figure something out to keep the story going, but that doesn't mean there's not stakes, because in my games, there's always a price. So yeah, you keep going, but now the story's changed. And yes, the core story is the same.
That's how a good adventure path works, Stephen, because I think when we were talking about a complete railroad roller coaster, we weren't saying all pre-written adventures are that. We were saying even some adventures written by you, the GM, in your home could be that, if you're just like, oh, it doesn't work unless all of these things happen a certain way. To give a good example, the Jewel of the Indigo Isles adventure path by, I guess us, has a ton of sections where it's just like, what if the PCs lose this fight though? Doesn't it seem like they are supposed to win? And it just tells you exactly what to do as the GM and how things progress, so that there are stakes and the world state changes in a certain way.
I'm patting myself on the back for that one, because I'm the one who told them to do that, and then they stole it. Well, no, because we have things in there, and it's like, what happens if the PCs lose? And we have it like 30 times in there, and we give
great.
Yeah, we give options of like, how do you keep this on track without, and making it feel natural. And like in the beginning of the adventure, we have it that, oh, well, they're captured by the pirates, and then like the governor shows up and bails them out.
You know? I think with the pirates, what happens is they're captured by the pirates, but those pirates are looking for the same MacGuffins as the PCs. That's why the PCs got into a scrape with them in the first place. So the pirate guy is like, well, I'm your boss now. Right. You have to go find it. Yes. You guys were close. You have some of the information. You're working for me. That's the deal. You have to take it or not. And so then the PCs have to figure out what to do and possibly double cross the pirate boss once they find the items that are a little stronger now. And we give them some options for that.
But there was also an option that the prince shows up and just bails them out.
Yes.
And so we had. But the point is, we give options for the GM just to get their brain going. Like, they can do anything they want, but at least we sort of help jumpstart that, because that could be a very discerning part being a GM, is that whenever the players do something, it's not even the players do something you don't expect, is that they derail the story. And now you're like, oh crap, I didn't prepare for this. Now what? And they're going to remember something you say. You'll say something once, and they'll remember that for the next 2 years. So you got to be very careful what you say. So we kind of prepare you and give you some things you can say off the cuff and not break the adventure, and then you can think about it till next week, and then you can prepare something. So
to transition maybe to another topic, Justin, do you have a good tip for GMs that get into that situation where maybe they haven't railroaded, but they have a general idea of roughly where things might go in this session, because it's the one they prepped for and they're kind of guessing, and then the PCs do something completely different
script,
just right in the middle. What's best practices, if you have any? And I have a few things to share too, but I want to hear from you first, of what you should do if that happens.
Well, some of this is setting yourself up for success, and that's a lot of what So You Want to Be a Game Master actually talks about. It talks about how the structure you use for designing scenarios that create what I refer to as robust scenarios, in that they won't break easily based on the PCs interacting with them. There are a lot of published scenarios out there that, like, if the piece, it's like the little fragile glass statues, and if the PCs like slip up or fail a dice roll, the glass statue tumbles to the ground and shatters into a million pieces. And so sometimes when people talk about robust, they go, oh, well, how do you force them to not use the glass statue? It's like, well, no, that's not, you're making the statue out of steel instead. So now they can do all kinds of stuff with it. They can throw it at people and like bounce it off the floor and whatever, and it still holds up. And that's what robustness is. But so sort of it gets back to that first principle, which is if you design scenarios, and the key mindset I try to get into, regardless of what structure I'm using, is the idea of what I'm preparing is a toy box full of toys. And those toys are set up in a way that I can easily pick them up and play with them. And so the mindset I am in as a GM usually is the same mindset I am as a player. I just have more toys to play with. So that when the players come to a session, they have a character. And if a player came to a session and was like, well, in this session, I'm going to do A, and I'm going to do B, and then I'm going to do C, we'd be like, that's kind of weird, because like you don't even know what the adventure is yet. And that's because when players come to a session, they are actively playing with the GM. The GM gives them something and they actively use their character to play with it, to interact with it. And you as a GM can be in the same mindset where what you have is just a collection of toys, and what the players give to you, you're like, oh, and then I can pick up this toy and I can use it and we can do this. And then they're like, oh, and then you're like, oh, I can also use this other tool, this other toy that I have. So it kind of comes back to those first principles. But no matter how you go into an adventure, there will come a point at some point in your GMing career where the players will do something and you don't know how to respond to it. And the most powerful thing I found that you can do at that point, if you're in a place where you don't know how to improvise past whatever the conundrum the players are presenting with you is to say, hey guys, I'm not sure what's going to happen next. Let's take a 5-minute, 10-minute, 15-minute break, or even, hey, I know we're a little early today, but you guys have gone a direction I wasn't expecting. So let's go ahead and call it here 15, 20 minutes, half an hour early, and we'll come back next week and I'll be ready for it. And it's perfectly fine to just be kind of open with this, because I'll tell you one thing players love is actually hearing that, because then the players know, oh, we actually are in control. He is listening to us. He is playing with us. And that is extremely exciting for players. And like I say, sometimes you just need like 10 minutes to be like, I just need to like think quietly in a room, or to quickly sketch out a dungeon map, or to quickly put together an adventure recipe, like the 5-node mystery from So You Want to Be a Game Master, for example, which is the other power of these structures. If you know how these structures work, you can very quickly often put together adventures and pour content into them, knowing it's going to work without getting caught up on like, I don't know what to do. So, somewhere in there was probably an answer to your question.
Yeah, no, that was a good answer to first try to come armed with something that is not so fragile that you'll have to do that. But if you do, take a break. That was what I was going to suggest too. I wanted to see if you had something that was different, but I also think that's the best solution. Be honest, be upfront. Don't feel like you need this mystique as a GM that you're always prepared, or you always got it, and try to blow onward with not being sure, unless you really like doing it by the seat of your pants without having anything, which is some people's style. I'm pretty improvisational, but even I probably wouldn't want to do it if it literally was going far away. Just taking that break, as you said, Justin, makes people feel good and lets you do some really interesting things. So to give you an example, I was playing in a pre-published adventure that was being run by Linda Zias Palmer, who is was not yet at the time a legendary narrative developer, but was still very, very skilled at running these. And the scenario setup was that there was a person we were supposed to find who had gone to a ruins that we had been to before, and there was a new level underneath it or something like that. And we knew where it was geographically and who it was, and was a part of our organization. And we had some of her notes and things. And so I was playing my archer. The priest and the wizard got together and said, hey, we have her things. We have some of her stuff. We could just scry on this person. We met her before, and we can teleport. It's the same location. We know the location. We'll see where it is, so we'll be able to see it directly. We have everything we need for this. And Linda was looking at that adventure and was like, that's the entire adventure. So she did that. She said, let's take a 10-minute break, please. It was, pre-published adventure. It was for an organized play campaign. She needed to run it like roughly as it would be. But after 10 minutes, she's like, okay. And we teleported in. And we found that person, and there were a ton of other people that were with her. And we then had to fight the final boss. But then we hadn't defeated anything else yet, and there was no way we could teleport out the 30 people that were there. So we had to do an escort mission backwards through the adventure. And it was extra hard. There was one fight with 32 weakling monsters that wouldn't have even challenged us. And I'm not sure why it was in the adventure initially. But when we were going backwards with our hostages, it was very hard to stop those monsters from killing one of the hostages or one of our escorts. So it just shows that if you just take a little time, even if you have constraints, you can think of something.
That's great. I love everything about that. The other thing, to go to the other extreme, like a really simple example of a way that you can prep to give yourself the tools to succeed is a mystery scenario. Something I've learned when designing a mystery scenario specifically is I always try to include one thing that I call a proactive node or a proactive element. Excuse me one moment. Apologies for that to everyone listening on headphones. But this proactive element I try to include is actually derived from like something Raymond Chandler said about writing pulp detective fiction, which is that when he was writing stories and wasn't sure what would happen next, he would just have someone with a gun kick down the door, and then a scene would happen. And that's the kind of proactive element you want, which is that if in a mystery scenario the players get stuck, for example, or they go off on some wild tangent where they're convinced that Linda Carlini is actually responsible for everything, so they're flying to Hollywood to meet with her, despite the fact she wasn't even an NPC in the adventure. But whatever, you can have these proactive elements that you can then, as a GM, have come to the players and bring the adventure back to them. Assassins, people kicking down doors. There's a new murder victim. The bad guys rob a new bank. These are all very simple things you can prep ahead of time as a flexible tool that you can be ready to throw at whatever the PCs. Whatever unexpected things the PCs do.
I have a question. So, Mark knows all my tricks, so none of this is going to be new to him. So, I use a lot of. I come from a video game background, and I feel like a lot of people who play these games know video game terminology and shortcuts. So I like to use those in my role-playing games because it's a language they already know. And one thing video games often will do is they telegraph fights, important fights with bosses, sub-bosses, main bosses. You never just run into a boss room. It's very rare. And if you do, either the boss runs away to prepare you for the actual fight, or there's a save point. JRPGs are famous for this. It's like there always seems to be a save point right outside the room for the main boss. So I like to do the same thing. Like I like to telegraph well ahead of time that my players are going to be fighting something really big so that they can go all out. They can use all their dailies. They can prepare. They can rest. They can go and just have a lot of fun. And as a GM, I find it fun because I don't have to hold back. I'm like, okay, you got everything. You're bringing your A game. Well, I'm bringing my A game too, baby. And let's have some fun and see where it goes. Because back when I was younger, I like to think the other way, like, ooh, I'll surprise them with the boss. And then they get their asses kicked. And no one had fun, I felt bad, and then they'd have to retreat and, like, recoup and, like, redo it a second time. And what's your thought? Or if you cover anything like that?
There's actually a chapter in the book called Dynamic Dungeons, which begins building on the basic dungeon procedures at the beginning of the book and begins looking at how dungeons can be run as a dynamic environment, either using random encounters or a technique I call adversary rosters, different ways of making that complex come to life and having the bad guys actively respond to the activities of the players. And what the end state of that chapter is that not just are the bad guys reacting to the players, but because the bad guys are reacting to the players are able to actively engage with the bad guys and begin shaping the encounters themselves, where they can draw the bad guys into an ambush. And so this kind of goes back to some things I talked about, like what is the one true way, and I don't know that necessarily is one per se, but I think that you end up with natural signposting when the dungeon environment, for example, that the PCs are engaged with, is a logical way. That the CEO is on the top floor of the skyscraper. They're not in some random room where you can't anticipate them being, for example. And so when you have that sort of natural signposting that emerges from an adventure that makes sense and that you can interact with in a dynamic way, it gives the players the ability to sort of begin helping to shape the way that they want those encounters to work. Do they want to push on and fight the boss now because they're worried he's going to escape, or do they want to pull back and regroup? Becomes interesting strategical choices. So you add this strategic element to the game in addition to sort of the tactical one. It also is really nice because, like, if you force the PCs to fight the bad guy when they're completely depleted, then you often end up with players who are like, well, that wasn't fair. The GM forced us to lose, kind of stuff. Whereas if the players are like, we got to go get him, and then they get their asses kicked, and maybe they don't. Oftentimes, they will surprise themselves and me. But if they then get their asses kicked, they can be like, that was on us. We did that. We should have made better choices. And I think that's part of it, is like, for me as a GM, making sure that the players feel like they're responsible for what happens, that it wasn't forced on them. It goes a long way across the board in terms of those players feeling whatever the outcome ends up being, they enjoy it because they feel like they were responsible for helping to create that.
Yeah. And I'm just talking about telegraphing because, like, for example, they had to take out this guy in one of our adventures, and there was a big, bad, nasty like boss or like sub. It was a sub boss. It was like the boss who was bad enough, and then they had a minion who was super powerful, and they're like, oh man, the minion was just wrecking their world, and they took out the boss. They just concentrated, focus fire, took him out, and they're like, oh, what should we do about the minion? They're like, well, we're here. Let's take care of it. I didn't say anything. I just let them work it out. They're like, well, let's kill him now. It's like, nah, we're almost dead, and it's like we'll never see this guy again. Don't worry about it. It's like, and then and it was really 50-50. Half of them wanted to stay, half of them wanted to leave, but the half that wanted to leave convinced the other half, so they left. And sure enough, what happened is they're playing and they're in a big fight. This was a fight with it was a room with like 20 people. It was a massive battle, and this was like a worm. And then like the ground shakes, and all of them look at each other and go, "Are you kidding me?" And I'm like, "It's the sub boss. He's back. You should have killed him." But that was their decision. And I'm like, if you killed him, he wouldn't have shown up. But have fun, and boy, was that a fight. So you can have it both ways, you can have it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Player agency and signposting are interconnected.
Yeah.
Well, and I think like getting back to signposting, like I have nothing against battle maps. I run a D&D 3rd edition campaign that's been running for over a decade, and we use battle maps every fight. So this is not about battle maps being bad. But one consequence of using battle maps is that it tends to shrink the understanding of where encounters start. So like if you have to get everything onto a map that fits on your tabletop, it tends to be like, oh, well, then the PCs start on this map and the bad guys start on this map. And that limits the ways in which encounters can start. So something I do talk about in the book is, old school D&D used encounter distance, but you don't necessarily need to have that mechanic per se to think about when do you detect the bad guys? How far away are they? Surprise, obviously, we're all familiar with. Do they know you're there? Do you know that they're there? That kind of thing. But thinking about the different ways in which encounters can start beyond the limitations of your miniatures on the table is really important. And even without that, like first-time GMs often fall into the trap of like, oh, there's some bad guys, so I see them and we fight, and that's what an encounter means. And another tool that's in the book is something called a reaction roll, which I'm sure you're familiar with, Stephen, which is if you aren't certain how an NPC should react to the PCs in an encounter, you can make this reaction roll to find out, are they immediately hostile? Are they indifferent? Are they threatening? Are they friendly? Different types of things like that can help break you out of what I consider to be the bad habit of, ooh, there's bad guys, so we fight. And the interesting thing that will also happen is that once you begin introducing that, hey, encounters can be more than just we see each other at 40 feet and melee immediately, the players will begin thinking about how they can, oh, maybe we want to go negotiate with these people. Maybe we want to try to like figure out a different way of dealing with them. And I think that's really important. Like if you have to, the first step of getting to signposting is you have to break that the encounter starts at 40 feet and we roll initiative. You have to have a stage before that if you want to have any kind of meaningful signposting and structure and allowing the players to have control over their environment.
You know what I do?
It's always rough. It's rough when you have flip mats and pre-processed products and other things like that. It can get into a cycle where it's just like you are forced to not even use certain distances that are in your game. Also, I'm flattered that you think I look young enough that maybe I haven't dealt with reaction rolls.
Mark is he's an aged veteran.
Not as nearly as much as you guys, but still from the reaction rolls era.
You're pretty, you've been playing long enough. I was going to say is I use a VTT, so there's no such thing as too big a map. And that's the first thing. And the second thing is I do the trick of, because I use a VTT, everything's on a map. So my characters are always on edge because they're like, oh, are we going to fight? I'm like, hey, you're just walking in the market. You're just having a nice time. You want to get something to eat? And they're like, oh, where's the bad guy? Where's the fight? I'm like, there's no bad guys, no fight. Just enjoy yourselves. And they can't. But there really is no bad guy. It's just like throw them on a market map because I have one, That's a fun one because they're always on edge. Or better yet, they get no longer on edge and then you throw them into a fight. And so
Justin, I think you you had a really good insight here about how people are starting to learn based on those smaller maps and where encounters start, like a meta. of play. Because
Oh, yeah.
I actually posted a Reddit thread like a little while back about a game in which basically, long story short, our party started an encounter, right? There was a room, but there were no doors because there were tunnels. We were in the tunnel right outside of a large cavernous chamber. And we heard this sound, and it was like we thought the boss had either done some kind of buff or activated like a complex trap in there or something. And so like we kind of like peeked in, we shot at one of the minions. We saw there was definitely a trap in there. The boss was in there. We thought it was going to run out at us. We had 2 melee fighters, but they hung back. The boss just waited and wanted us to walk into the chamber with the trap. So we kind of backed away and we're like, well, our whole strategy isn't going to work. It's not going to come out. What should we do? Then we came back and we just decided, whatever. We know that half of our group are melee fighters, but they still have bows. So we tried to get the boss to come out, and we wound up eventually having the fight right from the edge where we could barely peek in to the chamber and not going into the hazards. And the consensus online was that my question was, I had heard from other people that most groups wouldn't have done that they would have just Leroy Jenkins into the hazard. So I wanted to ask online. And there was some really insightful commentary about how like the meta of the game has reached the point where many people just assume, well, if you're not in the room, then the encounter hasn't started yet. The exact same thing you said here today, Justin. I encountered that with an insightful Redditor. And they're like, so they would see what you're doing as cheesing it, almost as if you were trying to attack through a wall in a
Fascinating.
in like a video game, or from a spot where the monster can't hit you back or something like that.
Cheesing.
Even though they could literally have walked out, and like they did walk out and attack us eventually.
Mark, do what we do. The monsters walk through the wall and knock it down. We do that all the time.
So no,
Well,
I find it interesting that that's the new meta because of the way that the maps have made it to be like, no, you engage in it by entering the room, even if there's an obvious trap that is filling the entire room. That was something I wasn't expecting.
Well, you can see this also from like the way people talk about ranged combat, for example. Like the balance for ranged combat mechanics in D&D specifically, although this can affect other games other as well, is like if you have encounters that start at 400 feet, for example, which used to be common because it was literally hard-coded into the encounter rules, then ranged combat is incredibly powerful because you can get off volley after volley of arrow before the melee fighters can close. And so the game was balanced around that expectation. But when you always start fights within 40 feet, that advantage for ranged combat disappears. And so and this kind of gets into like an interesting thing that is something that affects role-playing games and doesn't affect other types of games in terms of balance. Like, for example, people talk about, like, why isn't the challenge rating precise? Why don't we always get the exact same outcome? Well, first off, we're rolling dice, so I know what to tell you, man. There's random elements. But B, like, the design of the encounter, who the bad guys are, what do their abilities combine with each other? How far away is the fight starting? Do they have a high ground? Is there a balcony? There's so many different factors that go into the actual balance that cannot be accommodated by a purely mechanical thing. The structure of the scenario, the structure of the encounter has a really outsized impact on that. And it was certainly something that was true in D&D 4th edition, where the desire to not allow variance in outcome was a design goal of the designers, and that impacted encounter design, because if you don't want that variance, then the encounter has to start in a very specific way and be structured in a very specific way. And you saw that in 4th edition D&D Adventures, for example, where it wasn't just, hey, here's this encounter, you need to be in the room, but hey, here's an encounter, these are the 4 spaces where the PCs will be starting, here are the exact spaces on the battle map where the monsters will be starting, and so you had to get that hyper specificity. So yeah, that meta has a very interesting impact. Now, I mean, in contrast, and so you want to be a game master, I have a whole section talking about theater of operations, that we do have a tendency, because we key dungeons as rooms. We have a dungeon map, we have numbers in rooms, we key content to room. We put 4 goblins in room 15. And so we, as beginning GMs, have a natural tendency to think, oh, the fight or the encounter with those goblins belongs to room 15. And so we will be in room 15 for that fight. And what you want to get to, in my opinion, as a game master, because you end up with a much more interesting dynamic of play for both you and the players, is that the room 15 is one part of a larger theater of operations. And that might mean goblins from another room coming to reinforce, but it might also mean using the hallway or falling back to a more defensible position. There's a lot of different ways in which, but you want to think about not just the room of the encounter, but the total theater of operations of what's going on in the dungeon as a whole. And there are techniques you can use both to prepare yourself mentally as the GM for what that means, and also techniques you can use in your prep of the dungeon that will make it easier to run dungeons like that. Again, techniques like random encounters and adversary rosters and the way you think about the dungeon map.
I like that term, theater of operations. That's a good way to encapsulate that insight using the Rumpelstiltskin principle that if you give a name to something, you gain power over it.
I think that's a military term.
Mm-hmm. It is, yeah.
Oh, well, I mean, I know that it's a military term overall.
Yeah.
But I didn't realize that using it for tabletop RPGs in the same way that you pull it out from the military was used in a lot of cases, essentially.
I would say this, we actually talked about this before we started, that like people talk about the 3-clue rule without knowing I did that. I'm pretty sure I was the one who started applying theater of operations to, so unless you've read the book or a couple of articles on my website, you may not have heard it. It's not actually widespread, but it's the way I think about it.
I think it's a great way to think about it. We had a super chat from Ollie, right? That Ollie got the book for Christmas. Very good, very thick.
Very thick indeed. It is, for those who are joining, a very thick boy indeed, with a lot of stuff in there. Thank you so much, Ollie. I'm glad you're enjoying your Christmas present. You know, at the beginning of Technoir, there was an earlier thing from TSL Frontman in chat who was asking about mega dungeons specifically and common pitfalls that you can fall into when designing mega dungeons. So for those who may not be familiar with like mega dungeons, there's a bunch of different ways to get, they're big dungeons. For me personally, I consider a mega dungeon to be specifically like a campaign style dungeon where it is so large that you cannot clear it and that there are multiple things going on inside of it. So you can have dungeons of various sizes, but you want to have sort of like multiple scenarios within the dungeon. So the biggest pitfalls to avoid in my mind for mega dungeons is that you do not want the goal of the mega dungeon to be clear the dungeon, which can be something really difficult to wrap your head around because a lot of dungeons are built around go in there and clear the dungeon. There are goblins in the old tower outside of town, so go to the tower and kill all the goblins. There are bandits in the caves outside of town, so go to the caves and kill all the bandits. The evil cultists have taken up residence in the basement beneath the old ruined castle, so go there and kill all the cultists. That clear the dungeon is a very easy default goal for a dungeon, and which is great because it's also a very easy one, particularly in D&D with a combat system to go and do. But in a mega dungeon, if your goal is clear the dungeon, the mega dungeon collapses into a very monotonous routine because the entire style of play becomes go to a door, kick it open, fight the thing there, go to the next door, kick it open, fight the thing there. And over the course of, if that's the only thing you're doing in your campaign is just going door to door, that becomes very monotonous. So that's the biggest pitfall I recommend. So this gets into the question of what else can be at stake, what else can be our goals. And so what you want in a mega dungeon is you want your goals to be things like go hunt down the Minotaur on level 4, or whatever reason you come up with why you want to do that, or specifically find the Ruby of Caudium, that there's the specific treasure you want to find. So your goal isn't to kill everything there. In fact, killing everything there may not be the best way of accomplishing, and probably isn't the best way of accomplishing, let alone the safest way of accomplishing the goal that you're actually there to achieve. Because the minute you get to that point in the mega dungeon, then the mega dungeon becomes a strategic arena in which you can make meaningful strategic choices about, well, which monsters am I going to try to avoid? Which monsters am I going to try to fight? Which monsters will force me to fight them? Which monsters could I maybe make an alliance from? How do I get information about the dungeon? It becomes a much more interesting and dynamic environment to engage with as a group when the goal isn't just kick down the door and kill everybody who's there. Which then ties into the other thing I would recommend, which is to really use what I refer to as Xandering techniques or nonlinear dungeon design techniques, where if your mega dungeon only has one path through it, the same monotony sets in. An easy example of this is like if you encounter goblins on level 2 and you can't beat them for some reason, and the dungeon is laid out in a linear fashion, then there's no other option except to just keep throwing your face against that wall. But if there are multiple paths and routes, different ways that levels connect to each other, then when you have those same goblins, right, then you have a situation in which you could negotiate with them. You could find a different route around them. You could make an alliance with a different faction and have them come up behind the goblins. There's a lot of different ways you can deal with the problem of those goblins, either directly or indirectly, when you have that strategic variance. But you only get that if there are multiple routes through that dungeon. A good example of this in print, or rather a bad example of this in print, is actually the new Dungeons of the Mad Mage module, relatively new from WoTC, dealing with Undermountain, which is the individual levels have a lot of interesting sort of Xandering or nonlinear design in them, but each level, generally speaking, has one entrance and one exit from it. So your overall path through Undermountain becomes this very linear thing. We have to clear through one level, then the next, and which is the reason why a lot of DMs who are running Dungeons of the Mad Mage, for example, report that the experience becomes very monotonous, or that their players become disengaged and bored with it. It's because they're forced through this sort of linear chain and can't strategically engage with that dungeon. So I thought that kind of tied together some of it, talking about dungeons and stakes and goals and so forth.
I meant personally.
100%. So Dungeon Masterpiece Super Chat. Thanks, Steven and Justin, for coming on my Mega Dungeon live stream.
Oh, hey there. How you doing? We were just talking about that earlier.
Yep.
We had such a great time.
We were just talking about that and Mega Dungeons in this question. Everybody's been doing Mega Dungeons. Linda and I, over the holiday break, had a Mega Dungeons advice video on Arcane Mark. And honestly, it was very similar to what Justin just said. We also heavily emphasize having multiple factions so that the PCs can try to find a way to possibly make an alliance with one of them, or have something more interesting going on than just clear everybody out and it's all one thing. And we gave some examples, and I think that the multiple paths is really well taken as well. I don't think we mentioned that directly. It was probably implied by some of the things that we were saying.
I mean, I was going to say, it's like, I'm very curious reading your Mega Dungeon, because Mega Dungeons always sound like they're fun. And the few times I've done them, we got really bored. Like, we tried the Emerald Spire, and we got like a third into it, and we're just like...
Well, the Emerald Spire is pretty linear.
Yeah,
it's floor after floor, each by a different designer. And there were some like real superstars among that cast, but that it is, by its very nature, not very non-linear or interconnected, because each floor is its own separate microcosm with a different author.
So I figured it out, and I think I'd be curious what you think, and if you cover this, Justin, is that, in my opinion, and Mark and I talk about this a lot, there's a lot of generic Game Master things you can use, but really, in the end of the day, it's whatever your group likes. Because, like, my group likes manga anime style complexity with subplots within subplots within subplots, fighting lots of varied bosses, certain death around the corner, lots of fat loot, and lots of variety. They want story. They want to use their characters in interesting ways. They want to try out all their powers. They want to kick ass and be very, very close to the brink of death at all times. And that's what they like. And then I have another group that's completely different. They're like heavy into the role-playing, heavy into the story and the history of the world and their characters, and, going on side quests to talking to their ancestors. And, and like the two groups couldn't be more different in that sense, because the other group, they're like, like after an hour of me talking about like the lore, they're like, okay, enough. Where's the fight? Kick in the door. Let's go. They just want to fight. They couldn't care less. And the other group, we literally spent like 2 hours just in a restaurant, and they loved it. It's just, what's your take?
100%. I mean, you have,
Okay.
it's like, it's like if you talk about TV, for example, and you would never talk about TV and be like, well, Breaking Bad is the one true way of running a TV show. It has to be set in the Southwest of America, for starters. You can't have a TV show that isn't in the desert. It has to involve drug dealers, and it has to be this really involved character drama. We don't talk about TV shows that way, but for some reason we often fall into this trap with role-playing games where we're like, oh, well, there's this one true way. Everyone should be playing in a mega dungeon. Everybody should be playing in a political campaign. Everyone should be playing Blades in the Dark, or whatever the case may be. And for me, it's much more about, like you say, it's partially about what's appropriate for the game we're currently playing, and individual players and game masters are going to have particular tastes for particular genres or methods of play, and you want to find that for the group, and make sure that you are running the game that all of you can enjoy. One of my superpowers as a GM is that I am a slut for different kinds of games. I can play Alice is Missing and have a great time. I can play an old school hack and slash, kick down the door dungeon crawler and have a great time, which means that when I'm running games for different players in different groups, usually I can find a way to run a game that I enjoy doing and that they also enjoy doing. And of course, the unicorns out there are also the players who all similarly like very flexible in what they enjoy, because then you can collectively all go and do different things. You can run a crazy old school Gonzo D&D campaign, or you can run a Cold War spy Knights Black Agents campaign with them, and we all get on the same page for each one of these very different experiences and enjoy them in different ways. And that can be it's very rewarding to have that range of experience, in my opinion.
So wait, if everything's different, then
and
how
Steven,
do you write a book?
asked two questions, but your second question is the one that Justin answered, because you kind of asked the second one before we could say anything about the first one. Your first one being that you've always heard that mega dungeons were cool, but then whenever you do run into them, they fall flat. I think Justin's previous answer about mega dungeons can serve to highlight probably why that happened, which is that everything that Justin said about how to make a good mega dungeon is also pretty difficult to do in a pre-published mega dungeon because of a variety of reasons, including page count limits and other things, and is kind of easier to do if the mega dungeon is like kind of more of an outline if it's pre-published, and then the GM can fill things in as needed to have the interactivity, the multiple factions, and all the other things brewing on. And not that you can't pre-publish a mega dungeon that's like that, but it's very challenging, and it may either take a lot of space or leave a lot for the GM to fill in a way that some pre-published adventures don't want to do, for the reason that you said, Stephen, where you're like, man, they told me I had to fill all of this in. I don't like it when they tell me that. So
D&D was born in the mega dungeon, right? Like Dave Arneson created the modern role-playing game in the mega dungeon of Blackmoor. Gygax copied that for Castle Greyhawk. That was when they wrote 1974 edition of D&D, that was what they assumed the game would primarily be. You'd start campaigns and you'd make your own mega dungeon. But none of them published their own mega dungeon for years and years and years, because they couldn't figure out how to capture what they considered to be the essential element of the mega dungeon, which was that interactivity. The fact that the mega dungeon was always evolving in play meant, well, how do we capture that in the static format of the page? And I think recently, in the last 10 years or so, people have begun figuring out how to maybe capture some of those elements better on the page, but it is a challenge to capture that interactive element, the reactive element of those dungeons on the page. I will say too, like on that note, like the best experiences I generally have with mega dungeons, I talk about mega dungeons being like a dungeon that can support a whole campaign by itself, and I think that really is kind of what distinguishes a mega dungeon from just being a large dungeon. But very rarely do I run mega dungeons as the only thing that's happening in a campaign. So like one of my favorite adventures is the Bane Warrens by Monty Cook, and that's not really a true mega dungeon because it's more of a scenario oriented, but it's a very large dungeon. But one of the things he does in the design of that dungeon is the dungeon is designed with other NPC factions who are exploring the dungeon at the same time, and those and other factors will pull the PCs out of the mega dungeon to go deal with faction politics and other adventures in the city above the mega dungeon in order to be able to continue their exploration of the mega dungeon. So you get that sort of more complicated. The mega dungeon becomes the centerpiece of the campaign, but it's also the key that unlocks these complicated faction politics. And like people sometimes ask me, how would you remix Dungeons of the Mad Mage, for example, to make it a more interesting scenario for players who are struggling with it? And the answer is, well, you have all the interesting faction stuff in Dragon Heist, and particularly my remix of Dragon Heist. Figure out how to bring that faction play into Dungeon of the Mad Mage, figure out how to connect the city of Waterdeep to the mega dungeon and have the players engaged with both and the two of them affecting each other, and you'll get interesting play out of that. The other successful play I've had with mega dungeons is running it as part of an open table, which is also how Dave Arneson and Gary Gygax and other early dungeon masters are running mega dungeons, which is that they didn't have one specific group of dedicated players who were playing at their table. They had 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 different players who would who would flexibly form different groups and go into the same dungeon at different times with different characters, which adds a really interesting dynamic component to those investigations, because you know that other players are engaged in the same scenario you are. Will they get to the treasure before you do? Can you get maps from them? You hear about rumors of things they've discovered, and can you figure out how to go find that as well? So that's another way of adding that dynamic element to mega dungeons. And when we moved from having those kinds of open tables to more dedicated tables, which is how at least 99% of people play role-playing games these days, that is a dynamic element of what Dave Arneson and Gary Gygax sort of considered classic mega dungeon play that has dropped out from those experiences. There's multiple ways in which you can introduce these sort of dynamic elements that help make a mega dungeon more interesting than that flat kick down the door experience.
Yeah. By the way, we have a question from Dill Column. So when will we see Battle Zoo Mega Dungeon, one that shows how it's done right? I'll tell you, Julie Indigo Isle, if the entire world is the Mega Dungeon, then that
it's
entire
not a mega
adventure
dungeon, Steven.
is a mega dungeon. Hey, it could be.
Stretch.
That's a stretch, but isn't the whole world a mega dungeon if you think about it? If you pull
I
out
will
far
say
enough...
this. I will say this. One of my coworkers from Paizo was fond of saying that Wind Waker shows you that islands are really like an archipelago is kind of a dungeon. And I made an archipelago dungeon in the dungeon Ancestry because like each island is kind of like a room or an area, and you connect through them on the ocean, which is kind of like the hallways. And so there can be dungeons that look non-traditional.
Yes, Wind Waker.
I don't doubt it. However, I wouldn't say that just because the setting is on islands that it's definitely a mega dungeon, because there are cities and other things that are in it. And sure, you can have a city in a mega dungeon, but I don't think that like those are like dungeon cities, and they're different than just saying that everything's a dungeon.
I was kidding, sort of. I'll tell you one of the best dungeons I saw. It's not a mega dungeon, but Dungeon Crawl Classics #1, Idols of the Rat King, which is pretty much a dungeon. And that one, there is goblins who hire you to kind of to go down there, and you have to fight. There's goblins against were-rats, and so there's factions. So it's not just you exploring the dungeon. You have to deal with these two factions. But then my favorite part of that, and this is a bit of a spoiler, but it did come out like 15 years ago. So in the dungeon...
Close your ears until I wave my hands again.
In the dungeon, there is one room where there's a vampire that's just sealed away. It's like a sealed off area, and of course the PC's like, oh, let's get to it, let's go. And the vampire, not only that, is way too high level. And it's like, so it's like, oh, they added new factions. Like it was just hanging out there, you know. It's stuck in this dungeon, and that was such a like, you know, that came out of nowhere. I was like, oh, this is a fun dungeon because there's actual life. It's like it drives me crazy, those dungeons of like monsters just sitting there waiting for you to kill them. You know, it's like, what are they doing? Like what are they doing?
I'm gonna wave my hands
because
the spoiler is over. Don't talk about that spoiler for the adventure
okay, well,
again.
the spoiler's over. But you know what I'm saying? It's like it always bothers me when there's just dungeons of people sitting there waiting for them to die. You know, it's like, have the dungeon have life to it. Have the dungeon have a purpose. You know, it's like, have it exist for a reason. And I presume you go through that in your book or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, one thing is just like, yeah, I mean, for the dynamic dungeon chapter we talked about has all things about bringing the dungeon to life. But the thing you said about factions is really interesting in terms of both how you design dungeons, but also other scenarios as well, which is that when you have these multiple factions that are in competition with each other, what often happens both in the real world and in the initial setup for an adventure is that there'll be some sort of status quo that has been reached, like the defensive lines have been reached or whatever. If you set it up right, what you really want to do is set it up so that an analogy I've heard is you prep exploding barrels, and the idea that if you disturb an exploding barrel, it's going to explode, right? It looks like it's all stable and everything, but as soon as you introduce the PCs into a scenario, you want it so that even the smallest actions they take have the potential to result in huge catastrophic consequences. Possibly catastrophic for them, could be catastrophic for other people as well. But the point is, like, you want a big shift, because that's the point where you have it comes back to stakes again. And we talk about that a lot in this stream, but it comes back to stakes. What's at stake? Well, the choices you make and the things that fall out from that. Once the players really begin to internalize that idea that like, oh, the things we do matter, that's when they become invested.
Yeah, I mean, well, I always think you have to have conflict. Like, there's I've taken a million script writing classes. It's like no conflict, no story. Period. End of story. Like, first thing they teach you, it's like the conflict is story is conflict, and you have to have conflict, and that's why you have things like factions, because it's like, oh, conflict within conflict. Like, it's like you have conflict and they have conflict and you're stuck in the middle of other people's conflicts, and that suddenly makes things very complex without you really having to do anything. You just sort of set that up, and the PCs can go from there and see how they, who are they siding with? Are they siding with anyone? Are they trying to avoid them? Are they killing everyone? Are they bringing in a third faction? Who knows? And you always need stakes. You always need conflict. And in my opinion, you always need story, because I think that's the big problem with these mega dungeons, is that without a story, you're just hanging out and killing things. And that might be fun for a while, but at least my groups, they find it very boring, because it's like, all right, what like, this is a video game. I can play a video game and do this. Like, the whole point is we want to like interact and like tell a story and have growth with our characters and growth in the world and do something and accomplish things. And you can only get so far in combat. They want to actually have real stakes. And what I find fascinating, and I don't do this a lot because I don't finish a lot of games, but eventually our adventure paths end. I don't know if you cover this, but like the last adventure with the group, and then have them do their epilogues. Like, it's like, okay, you're done. Now what? Like, what did your character do? How do they retire? Where do they end up? What do they do? And the funny thing is, I only got to how about this? 4th edition D&D, and I got all the way to level 20. And this campaign, my friends...
But not level 30 in 4E?
No, only level 20, because we're not that crazy. And I've mentioned this campaign a million times, just the one Seth. And he had me. And it's funny, because I can't remember much about this campaign, but I remember the end, and I remember the last day, and he had me as the handmaiden of Loth. And it was awesome. I'm like, that's a send-off, because my character was... kind of chaotic and kind of mean and kind of a little nuts, and what a shock to regular viewers who know me well. And I love that, and to this day I'm like, that is so cool that's where the character ended up. And I feel like that's not addressed that much, is that you talk about the beginnings and the middles, but I don't see people talking about the endings so much.
Yeah, this is a technique I use frequently when I'm ending a campaign. Actually lifted from Eternal Lies, which is a fantastic campaign for Trail of Cthulhu from Pelgrane Press. And at the end of that campaign, this won't have any spoilers for the campaign, it's just a structural thing at the end of the campaign, is at the end of that campaign, what they say is, okay, now go around the table and ask each player where their character is 1 week from now. And then go around the table again and ask them where their character is 1 year from now. And then go around the table again and ask them where they are 10 years from now. And you don't want to do it like the common mistake I see people. It's like, oh, I asked the first person where they are in a week, a year, and 10 years. No, you want to have it go around multiple times at each level, because that way the characters can build on each other's stories. But it's a really powerful technique. Oh, and an important thing there too is that you do it, and then you as the GM also then take a turn to show how the world is as evolved in that week or year or 10 years or whatever the time period you want to do is. And it's a very powerful technique, because it helps the players express the things that they're interested in about where their characters were headed. So it becomes a very easy way for you as the GM to accomplish those things. But yeah, endings are tough. Endings are tough in any medium. One of the biggest things this is going to be tangential, but one of the biggest things that made Terry Pratchett such an amazing author so consistently for so many books was that Terry Pratchett was a master of having an ending that always pulled everything together and then delivered the big satisfying conclusion that you either were looking for or didn't realize you were looking for, but it was always the right conclusion for the book. So endings are tough. And doing it in an interactive medium like RPGs is even tougher.
Well, I think I learned something. I like that technique, because, as I said, and it's also something, even someone who's been doing it for 40 years, you don't do it a lot. You don't get to endings that frequently. So, and you don't want to mess it up.
Maybe more often for your shorter sessions that don't need as
Exactly.
complicated of an ending either.
Right. I mean, I'm talking about something who went from level 1 to 20 with this huge epic story. So it's like, you better have a kick-ass ending. And one of the characters turned into a dragon, and she was very happy. I became Hangman in the Loth. I was very happy. I forgot what the other two did, but everyone was very happy with their endings. You know, it was like, oh, that was a good ending. You know, and I would say, when you do your next book, let's talk a little bit more about that, about endings, because I never see people really give good answers in character death. I never see people really talk about endings. You know, I see a lot of people talk about beginnings and middles and how to run things and how to optimize. I see that a lot, optimization, and that's great. Trust me, I still learn stuff from that, and how to, you know, ask questions, or how to deal with argumentative people or problem players and all that fun stuff we've all heard a million times. But it's the things that people really don't talk about that much, is like, you know, it's like, oh, like you were saying, it's like, well, the battle map, if it's when you bring out the battle map, is everyone like, oh, it's combat time, you know, and everyone's like telegraphed that, you know, you're having combat. Or, okay, well, how do you end the campaign? What do you do with your characters? Should you be telegraphing, you know, fights or bosses, or should you be giving loot out specifically? Actually, here's a question. Should you be giving out loot specifically for PCs that they can use? Or should you just give out whatever, especially if you're in a pre-written adventure, whatever they give them, just give it to them and let them sell it and buy whatever they want?
That's a great question. I tend to be, so it's actually a third path there, which is give them whatever, and they can't sell it, and they have to deal with whatever it is.
So it's the second path, but harsher.
Yeah. And there's so the interesting thing about that path, and like a game that does this very well, I know we've been talking about Monty Cook a lot, but Monty Cook's Numenera actually kind of bakes this in, because the whole concept of Numenera is that the Numenera takes place 1 billion years in the future. There's been 8 mega civilizations that have done things like dimensional travel and time travel and stuff. And you're in this Renaissance period that's rediscovering this lost technology from past eras. And the Numenera ends up being sort of like these oftentimes one-use items that have this one special effect, and you use them and they're gone. And part of the fun of playing that game is that you basically just sort of randomly toss these weird things that have powerful one-shot abilities or whatever, and then you see how the players choose to use those things. So there can be a lot of fun with that. Again, like I've run campaigns in all ways, and there's strengths and weaknesses to all of them. I think that if I was going to do like a general rule, the one thing I would say is that not every piece of loot should be something that the players have requested. There should be some surprises. It's like buying Christmas gifts for people, right? Like you go to their wish list, but like not every present that somebody gets should be something that was on their wish list. There should be some surprises. And I think that's the one general thing I'll say is whether it's all surprises or only some of it's surprises, it shouldn't just be shopping by proxy.
I agree, but I do want to say the surprises probably shouldn't be mostly like fruitcake and sweaters that the person didn't want. So in my personal opinion, there's lots of ways to do it, and some people may have different preferences, but I think the ultimate best one is one they didn't even think of, but they love when they receive it. Whereas if you're just like, oh yeah, you're a great sword user, we're going to drop this whip that requires a weird proficiency that you don't even have, and like is not the type of weapon that you're specialized in using or something like that, and nobody in the party can use it. It's just like, I don't know if you should do that a lot. Maybe once or twice, but consider that as a treasure item that the party's probably not going to use, or they'll put it on a character who is not really martially inclined or something like that.
That's a great. I mean, that's great. That's a great example too of like in D&D specifically. There's the weapon proficiencies and armor proficiencies, and if you aren't taking those into account, what is that? I'm thinking more about like the most memorable magic items in my experience tend not to be the +2 swords, right? It's the quirky stuff. Like you never anticipated that you wanted a figurine of wondrous power, but somehow that figurine of wondrous power became the mascot of the entire campaign. Or I remember one campaign where like the folding boat that was in some random treasure roll became the most significant thing that they used in every single encounter somehow from that point forward. That's the kind of weird quirky stuff that you'd never anticipate. And that's where the fun of random treasure rolls can come in, is that even you as the dungeon master won't necessarily anticipate what wackiness will result as because of one particular iron stone or whatever the case may be.
Hey, the tree feather token, that is a dungeon breaker.
Mhm.
That thing has broken more of my dungeons than any other piece of magic. Because they're like, oh, I make a tree, and it's like, oh, great! It goes through everything. It breaks the dungeon. It like goes through the wall, goes through the ceiling. You have a tree in the middle of the battle, and like they're always doing it to me. But I
Well,
let them because it's crazy. It works.
like I remember the one time. So there was one time in my campaign where the PCs became aware that a faction had a teleportation ring, and I forget how that happened exactly. But they were like, "We really want that ring," so they went to the faction and were like, "Can we buy that ring from you?" And I was like, "I don't know if I want these guys to have a teleportate." This was like a 5th or 6th level party, like way before you're supposed to have teleport. So that was like, I don't know if I want you guys to have teleportation magic. So I was like, but the faction in question would certainly like to have a favor from these guys and also a large amount of money. So that was what it was the PCs ended up owing some people a favor that they probably really shouldn't have been owing a favor to. It was like a crime family. And then it was also, I was like, here's a huge price tag. And I was like, how much do you guys want it? And they were like, we want it enough to sell everything we have that's portable and put all of our cash reserves into buying the ring. And I was like, okay, then yeah, you have the ring. Great. And it turned out to be, I was skeptical about it, but it was so important to them. I was like, let's go with it. And it ended up being really interesting because the ring, just following the normal rules of teleportation, they couldn't teleport their whole group at the same time. So it ended up often being like really a strategically interesting thing for them to figure out, well, how are we going to use this powerful magic to accomplish what our goals are? And also because it's D&D, random teleportation mishaps. And so they have now had to invest additional resources into featherfall spells to make sure they don't plummet out of the sky and crash into the ground. Because if there's any time when they can have teleportation mishap roll at the worst possible time, they will absolutely roll the teleportation mishap roll at the worst possible time.
See, that's what the new versions take out is all the fun, all the breaking, all the mishaps, even ours in Pathfinder. There's you're when you teleport, you're off by 1%, and they were teleporting a pretty far distance. And they were like, that 1%'s gonna matter, and because they were teleporting onto a boat.
Yep.
Yeah, you basically can't teleport onto a boat because of the 1% rule. I mean, you can teleport close to a boat, but I hope you have a way to get to the boat from there.
Well,
if you're really close,
risky, yeah.
Then maybe, like site to site, you're probably still on the boat. Maybe if you teleport to the center of it.
Yeah, but it sounds like we're all on the same page. Like, you want to have a lot of random.
I do want to circle back to a question you
craziness.
asked, Stephen, as you were wondering why so much more attention is spent to starting games and retaining games than to ending games. And there is a reason for it that's not just that people forgot, which is that the statistics of our hobby are such that you will need to start many more games and have struggles retaining them than you actually managed to end the way you wanted to, and not just because it died in the middle.
I completely understand why. I'm just saying
that's the answer. You were like, I wonder why. Why
is nobody do that? That's
why. There's something too, yeah. But there's something to be learned here actually from there's something to be learned here from like TV showrunners who know what they're doing, which is that TV showrunners who know what they're doing will plan escape hatches at the end of their seasons. And like J. Michael Straczynski with Babylon 5 did this. Joss Whedon, when it was controversial now, but Joss Whedon was a master of this with Buffy and Angel and the shows that he did. It doesn't always save you. Sometimes the network will cancel you mid-season, and there's nothing you can do. But having those escape hatches. So a good way to think about this in D&D is if you're planning a 1 to 20 campaign for D&D 5th edition, for example, think about the tier breaks and think about, is there a way I could bring this campaign to a satisfying conclusion at a tier break? So if player schedules change or just if interest in the campaign wanes, think ahead of time about, hey, how could I actually wrap this up? Or look for those opportunities and think, hey, maybe I don't need to play the whole thing. How can we actually have a conclusion that's coming up?
But it's funny because you mentioned Breaking Bad, and Vince Vaughn, when he wrote the scene at the beginning of the final season where Walter White has the machine gun in the trunk, he had no idea what he was going to do with that machine gun. He just put it there, and then he wrote his way out of it. And if you want to talk about endings, I don't know how much. I presume. Did you watch Breaking Bad?
I haven't seen Breaking Bad all the way through yet.
Okay.
But
Well, I did a little.
I watched some of it, but
okay, wait.
the main character got too evil, so I stopped.
That's the best part. But I will say, watch it. I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
Because I'm not gonna spoil it. I promise. Is that he has probably the best ending I've ever seen for a television show, because he does something that the only other person ever did was Charles Dickens, but he did it successfully, is that there's actually 3 endings to the show. There's the really, really bad ending. There's but it's all like one after another, but you could, if you wanted to, end it where you wanted it, because there was an ending. It was like the really bad ending, the really good ending, and then quote the real ending. But any one of those 3 could have stopped the show at any one of those. And if you remember, Charles Dickens did that with not Christmas Carol, with Great Expectations, is that he put out the ending and everyone hated it. And then he was forced to write 2 more endings. One day everyone was happy at the end, and then one that was really bad. And then he's like, choose the ending you like. Here's 3 endings: the good, the bad, and the ugly. You choose the one you like. And he did it. I've never seen anyone do that. Vince Gilligan did it in Breaking Bad, and it's brilliant because all of them are fantastic. And I was like, wow, this guy didn't write 1 good ending. He wrote 3 good endings. I was like, damn it. No wonder he is who he is, So
setting impossibly high standards for the rest of us.
Well, on top of it, his second, Osmodeus, is considered like Osmodeus. I mispronounced his name, but you know what I'm talking about. It's like one of the top 10, endings of all time for any series, period. It's like 10s out of 10s. It's genius. It's very good. But I would strongly recommend, I would keep going. I mean, the characters are, well, that's what makes it so interesting. And is that you never get to see a character go from good to bad. You never see that arc, no one ever, they're just bad, The other closest one, I would say, is The Wire and Stringer Bell, if you've ever seen that, because then you get to see the daily life of someone who runs a drug empire, but he's genius, and he's not like a thug, and he's a businessman. His business just happens to be drugs and misery, which is fascinating. But anyhow, a little off topic. But I find myself that I learn a lot from watching. I'm very much into movies and script writing and television and seeing how they handle it. And I take my storytelling from these people because at this point they have mastered writing. They've mastered storytelling and technique, and they know all the tricks. And I try to use a lot of those tricks, a lot of storytelling tricks you see in movies, in my games. And I find, not patting myself in the back, they work because these work in movies. There's a reason why, people like these, they like to see these certain arcs in movies and TV shows. So if you do the same thing for your games, especially long-running games, you find that you have really good games. And the best part is you can do it in anything. It doesn't matter. It could be, as you said, it could be a dungeon crawl. It could be a intrigue. It could be a forest exploration. As long as there's a story, you definitely need a story. Without a story, you can't do this. But you have character growth. So... Well, man, we can go on forever, but I try to keep it under 2 hours. Now we're over 2 hours, and then we're going to keep going forever and ever. But I just have to have you on again when just keep going. We'll just do this every week.
Absolutely.
I mean,
every
we
week
said we need to do the 365 marathon at some point. 365 tips.
I'm just going to...
I will come back anytime you guys want me to.
I will literally just buy the audiobook and put it on the stream. There you go. You got them all right there. You have so many maps in here. I got to see how they do it with the audiobook.
Well, he said you can get the maps separately if you
I
have
know,
the
but what do they
audiobook.
say? They say node 1, ABC, leads to node A, BCD, leads to node B. I'm like, do they do that in the book? I don't know. It's like... It's funny because I always wonder how they do that anytime I see audiobooks for things with maps and charts. I was like, did they read them out? Did you listen to the audiobook, your own audiobook, or?
I haven't actually listened to the whole thing yet. I was actually the audiobook came as a surprise to me. So much like we were talking earlier about translation rights and how the publishing company handles that, which is great because they have all the contacts with these people. But because of the holidays around the release date of the movie, the book rather, there was a ball drop, and I wasn't told that they had licensed the audio rights for the book.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was on my Discord, and someone asked, "Is there going to be an audiobook?" And I said, the best way to do that is to reach out and ask people about it. And then somebody else said, well, what about this audiobook that's currently for sale? And I was like, okay, well, I guess there's an audiobook now. So it took me a little bit by surprise that the audiobook existed, which was super exciting, obviously. But I haven't had a chance to actually listen to the whole thing because it is a big, thick chunker of a book, and therefore a very long audiobook as well.
So let's see here. We have Justin's favorite RPGs. This is an interesting list.
At the back there?
Yeah, Numeria. I actually ran Numeria from Monty Cook. Numenera. Sorry. I ran Numenera from Monty Cook at Gen Con a few times.
There's so many cool things in the Seifter system. There's like a couple of things that don't work well for me because I'm a hoarder. And by don't work well, sometimes I mean work too well, depending on your situation. Like the XP being both accumulated to level up, and then also you use it on the fly to get a one-time benefit is like, it just does not work. I
think there are groups I've run for that works completely, but there are groups like for you, it would not work at all. And I really strongly suggest the house rule where you have XP for leveling up, and then you have XP for short-term benefit. And because there's so many short-term benefits built into the game, there's a ton of flexibility with that, and you don't have any problem with like the intrusion mechanics working with that still.
Yep. That is the house rule I suggested too, and that immediately gets rid of the only thing that was a big problem. And I say problem, but like, it was a problem because I was like 3 levels higher than everyone else, and then I didn't need the momentary benefits because I was just much more powerful than them because I never used momentary benefits.
Well, and the game can be very deceptive in terms of power level, because you think, oh, like tier 1 to tier 3, it's not that much of a difference. Like, no, tier 3 is significantly more powerful than tier 1 is. There's an article on the Alexandrian I talk about actually calibrating your expectations for what characters at different tier levels can do in Numenera, because it can be so I think initially deceptive for people. And thinking about who their characters are and what they can do, both as the game master running for them and also as a player playing that character.
By the way, I forgot to mention, do like and subscribe. We have over 200 people and only 89 likes. Come on, people. Don't you have thumbs? Art?
I did my part. I liked this.
Yeah, I did my part.
Yeah. I did my part.
There you go.
Starship Troopers. Ars Magica. I've never played that. Pendragon, I also have never played. I know these games. Technoir, I know nothing about Technoir. I've heard of it, but I know nothing about it. But it's
Pendragon, I want to play one of these times just because I'm really into Arthuriana, and I have not played it, but I've heard a lot of things about it.
Doing the full-blown Great Pendragon campaign is 100% on my bucket list. A campaign that's designed to be run over like 60 or 70 years of time with the same characters developing year by year.
Wow.
Ars Magica is a great game. It's designed by Jonathan Tweet, who was a co-designer of D&D 3rd Edition, and Mark Reinhagen, who would later go on to do Vampire the Masquerade and the World of Darkness. And Ars Magica's big claim to fame is everybody gets to play a wizard, and then the magic system is flexible, so you can spontaneously improvise your spell effects as you're actually going along. And then the game also has a meta structure of the wizards getting together and forming sort of a wizards covenant, a guild of wizards that they can then build up over time. If you enjoy doing that, like if you enjoy doing that with thieves and blades in the dark, Ars Magica is how you can do the same thing with wizards and have a good time with it.
Also, if you played Mage ever, you kind of played the not even just spiritual successor to Ars Magica, since like a lot of those like hermetic order groups in the Mage game are like directly taken from
even some of the clans from Vampire the Masquerade.
Yeah.
Were actually like...
Yeah, absolutely.
Because like Mark Reinhagen designed both of them. And for a while, White Wolf had actually bought the rights for Ars Magica before they actually sold the rights to Wizards of the Coast, who then sold it to Atlas Games, who currently publishes it. But for a while there, Ars Magica was literally like part of the World of Darkness. The official history was that. And then when they sold the rights to the game, it got confused because they'd sold the rights to the game. But yeah, they were literally the same thing for a good long time there. Technoir is a little bit of self-serving one. Technoir was designed by Jeremy Keller, who self-published it through a Kickstarter about 10 years ago. And about 6 years ago, he had left the industry and the book was going out of print. So I actually bought the publishing rights for the IP rights for Technoir and brought it back into print. But the cool thing there's two cool things about Technoir. One is that the core mechanic is that you have verbs and you use the verbs to push adjectives. So, for example, if you want to shoot someone, you'd use your shoot verb to push adjectives like riddled, as in riddled with bullets, or bleeding onto them. And then those adjectives have mechanical consequences, but they're improvised into existence. So you can very much describe this as what the effect I want to have on the world. There's a mechanical process for doing that.
And so like aspects in Fate
for it. Yeah, except with even more teeth in how it kind of works. It's a really fascinating completely different way of thinking about how to interact with the world mechanically. So, and then the other cool thing Technoir has is on the GM side of the screen, you instead of having adventures, you have what are called transmissions, which are details about a city specifically. And the city has a master table of connections and items and factions and so forth. But there's a sort of mechanics where as the players interact with aspects of the game world, you trigger the plot mapping mechanics to pull elements from this master table and put them together into a plot map that reveals the noir conspiracy that the PCs are involved with, either investigating or working for or tangentially involved with. And so it's a zero prep game for the GM where these vast, convoluted conspiracies boil out of the mechanics of the game. So it's really cool to run as a GM because you get to kind of discover the conspiracy yourself as you're playing.
So, a final question. Give me some of your favorite adventures.
Favorite adventures. I've mentioned a couple of them. Eternal Lies for A Trail of Cthulhu, which is by Jeremy Keller, actually was a co-author on that, along with Will Hindmarch and Jeff Tidball. One of the finest campaigns ever published. It is that's a spiritual successor to another one of my favorite adventures of all time, which is Masks of Nyarlathotep for Call of Cthulhu.
That's famous, that adventure.
Hugely influential on me as a designer. A lot of the stuff about node-based design is heavily inspired by the structure that Larry DiTilio created for Masks of Nyarlathotep, and it's just it is. I haven't actually, the thing I haven't. There's been several different editions of Masks of Nyarlathotep. I haven't looked at the most recent one, but I'm sure it hasn't ruined anything based on everything I've read about it. Those two are just master classes in design. I mentioned the Bane Warrens by Monty Cook earlier. Really great dungeon-based adventure that pulls in those faction-based things. Really enjoy that adventure a lot. That's set in the setting of Ptolus, which that isn't an adventure per se, but the Ptolus setting book is one of the really great masterpieces of the medium. What are some other great ones? Ego
You mean
Hunter.
This one?
That one right there. That's the book. I love that book so much. It's another chunker like my book, but the most amazing thing to me is every single page you flip to is aimed at giving the GM material for the table. Like you look up a weapon shop and it is the price list for that weapon shop immediately applicable, but also adventure seeds that can be dropped in that weapon shop. Just a fantastic.
Mark, this thing can eat our book.
I mean, Tolus is known to be the biggest.
This is it.
Yeah,
this is
just amazing.
Thing.
So that's all great. And the Bane Warrens are set in Ptolus, obviously. Not obviously, they are set in Ptolus. So that whole thing is fantastic. I was going to say Ego Hunter for Eclipse Phase is a adventure designed specifically to be a one-shot. The concept of the adventure is that somebody, so in Eclipse Phase, you can make copies of your personality and send them out in morphs or other bodies or digitally. So this guy makes a bunch of copies of himself to go do various tasks throughout the solar system. And then they all come home to get reintegrated into him, and they all discover that he has been murdered. And so all 6 players are playing the same character, but different copies of the same character who all then have to solve their own murder. And the whole concept is cool, and the whole execution of the adventure is really top-notch as well. That's another great adventure. Couple of random D&D adventures. I'm a big fan of G1 Against the Giants. it's a fun little raid type adventure. Sunless Citadel by Bruce Cordell and is a really great introductory. Lost Mine of Phandelver. I actually sort of review about how much I really liked actually Lost Mine of Phandelver as an introductory scenario. Probably the best introductory scenario I think D&D has had. And some people are like, oh, it's the best adventure for D&D. No, it's the best introductory adventure, and it's really solid. But it's a great place for anyone who's looking to become a GM. You should buy this book and then buy that, and you'll be good to go.
There you go. I think Eric Mona was in this.
I think he was in the Bane Warren's campaign.
He was.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
That's crazy.
I remember because he would talk about it, and just like also he was mentioned as a character when Monty was, or as a player when Monty was talking about it. That's one of the places where I found out is Talus, because I always pronounced it Tolus.
Interesting.
Like both of you guys did. But Monty and Eric pronounce it Talus. So I guess it's whatever your group wants to pronounce it. But
I've been running a Tolus campaign for 16 years. I'm changing nothing.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Listen, after getting to Paizo, there were certain things that people there who had created them pronounced really differently than like everyone in our region did, and we're like, nah. No.
I remember
it's like these consonants are not in the order of the way that you pronounce it. That's not how we're going to pronounce it.
There's a classic sigil versus sigil debate for Planescape.
That one.
Expect people to come to blows over that at some points. So,
well,
it does. In the real world, people pronounce real words differently. Like
That's
one
right.
of the tips we didn't get to was matryoshka searches, and every time I talk about matryoshka searches, people are like matroshka searches. I'm like, depends if you're in northern or southern Russia, and I'm in the United States, so I don't care.
There you go. All right, well, we can't go forever. I got to stop because I got stuff to do.
Yeah.
We'll just go again. We'll go again next time
later, or you could do this. You can do one with Mark. Because Mark's as busy as I am. So, but I promise we'll have you on again once. Now I know that you can talk about this topic forever until people's eyes bleed. We'll have you on.
I think
more
that
frequently.
Justin and I could just go back and forth on this.
I
Literally.
know.
We would get the 365 if I would want to bring in other guests and things for the 365 like Baron did, but in reality, we probably could do it. It just would be
exhausting.
It's not just you. I have tips and tricks. My tips and tricks are a little, I'd say, rougher. Because my characters, we used to get into physical fist fights in some of my games. So my tips and tricks are like how to
punch out the other player when they disagree with you on a ruling.
How to diffuse those situations.
You put the okay. I was gonna say what you do is you slide the bowl of Doritos to the far side of the table, so when they turn to reach for it, you can sucker punch them over the back of the blackjack.
That's right. And you use the dice bag in the blackjack.
We are so. It's the same guys I play with. And we talk about it's like, remember when we were in our 30s and we used to like get to blows about this stuff? And now we're like,
wait, that was when you were in your 30s?
Yeah.
I thought that was like
when
you were
when
teenagers.
That was recent.
Chat mentions the Amber Diceless role-playing game, and the only reason it didn't make the list in my book is because it's so difficult to find. But Amber Diceless role-playing game, if you can find I think it's PDFs are available now. Really awesome role-playing game.
Yeah, no.
So,
when I was in 20s and 30s, something about 3.5 D&D, we used to get into fights. Well, this is in the 90s, so we used to
a lot of things happened in the 90s.
Yeah, well, people have strong opinions, and it's funny now. It takes. I don't even think we raise our voices anymore. It's just like whatever. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. But every so often, those were the days. Those are the days. But now it's like, now we're old grognards and we read books like this, and we're just happy to get people together.
That's for young and new people too, because it's so you want to be a game master.
Oh, I know, but I was saying it's like we're just happy to get the people together to play.
Hold the books up and
everyone has
order now. We mentioned on the stream it's all sold out, but get your pre-orders in now so you get a copy as soon as you can. Right. Ebooks
Mark
and audiobooks
doesn't
also
have
available.
One. Mark isn't cool.
Yeah, I didn't get one in time. Cool. It's sold out.
I bought mine on Amazon the day after I saw Professor Dungeon Master, and then he yelled at me, and I bought it. I still got to read it.
I saw it before that. I was like, oh yeah, that's a good thing to get. And I was thinking that I'm hard to shop for holidays, so maybe I would tell people to get me that, and then I forgot, and then it sold out.
Well, yes, it's the audiobook for you, Mark.
Yep. There we go.
Well, and,
I don't think the audiobook would work for me. I'd have to get the EPUB or Kindle version or something.
you can definitely blame Professor Dungeon Master for it as well. His review had a major impact on things, and
he did
really
it like the day
appreciate
it came out, no less. He
Yeah.
he did it right away, and well, or you can just have Justin read it to you. Actually, that is funny. How long is the ebook? I'm curious.
Ooh, I should know that. I don't off the top of my head though. Over 10 hours. I know it's over 10 hours. I want to say 12 hours.
Oh, that's it? This book's huge. I thought it was going to be like...
You're reading at a good
probably
pace.
More than that.
Oh, okay. Because I'm thinking like a Stormlight Archive is like 45 hours or something. Like, it's.
Well, I guess the pages that are diagrams or maps, you can.
He's got a lot more spacing in here.
17 hours and 42 minutes.
Oh,
There you
okay.
go.
That's
17
pretty.
hours.
Yeah, that's pretty beefy. It's pretty beefy. I thought 10
Mhm.
hours was way too short. I'm like 10 hours.
Yeah, that was a little short seeming for the number of pages.
Oh, someone here, Jimmy, bought 5 copies and the audiobook.
There you go.
Well, thank you, Jimmy, very much.
What,
I did tell
is
people
this?
that if you are a GM, you should buy it for yourself. You also buy it for all of your players, so that one of them will run a game for you.
Yeah.
And then
And you don't
buy,
have to be
and
the
then buy
private GM.
extras
Yeah,
so that their
exactly.
players can give it to their friends,
Yeah.
and so on and so on and so on.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, everyone like and subscribe, and tomorrow at 8,
Secret history.
the whole history, every single thing, everything, including the secret chats that I was doing behind the scenes, the secret discords I was on, the people I was
Everything
talking
except for
to.
exposing the confidences of people who
True. That I can't do.
need to have their things kept secret.
Yeah.
Only thing Steven's going to expose his own stuff.
My own stuff. I'm going to expose myself to the world.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, well, I was interested, but now I'm a little bit more skeptical.
All right, well, it's not. Hey, man, that's how you get the clicks.
Right? Oh, yeah, you have to do it. You have to do it.
It's like, we expose the OGL. Oh, that's a good title. Maybe I'll retitle it. Now I'm thinking about it. But yeah, we're
Yeah,
gonna
go with that one. Don't go with Steven exposes himself. You'll get a very different audience for that one.
Could be Mark exposes himself.
You know,
You never know.
you
Mark
want
has a
to
big
follow
fan
the terms
base.
of service.
Mark has a
Right.
big fan base. People love Mark.
Mhm.
People don't really like me as much, but that's fine.
I think that we
design.
each have separate people who watch the stream for us, and so the overlap is interesting because of our interplay and our strengths in different areas, Steven.
Well, people like you because you co-designed Pathfinder, and people like me is because I'm lawful evil, and they feel like
You know a lot about business, and you made accurate predictions about how certain things would go when other
Very
people were
accurate.
predicting the other way.
I know, scary accurate. Because all I have to do is put on the business hat and say, well, if I was running it, this is what I would do, and then they end up doing it. And yeah, people are too nice. They're like, oh, they would never do this. I'm like, oh, you poor child. I feel sorry for you somewhat. It's like, I talk to my lawyers almost every day. You have no idea what's going on in this world sometimes. So corporations are
Scary.
pure evil. Anyhow, on that joyful note, thank you so much. I'm so happy. Do you go to Gen Con? I would love to hang out with you at Gen Con.
I have not been to Gen Con since COVID, but I'm hoping maybe this year.
Oh
So
wow, yeah, this year's was amazing. It was so
Yeah.
good.
I've
this
been in
year.
the same boat as you, Justin,
So
with
good.
COVID. I was hoping this year, but it seems like there's like a family wedding then. So maybe the year after.
Oh my god.
one of the reasons I didn't make it last year was actually because of this book. At the point where all the pre-registration stuff was happening for Gen Con, I was neck deep in finishing up the book because I personally gotten COVID the October before that when I was supposed to be working on the book and had COVID for 2.5-3 weeks instead. And so there was a point where I was like, well, I guess I'm just going to be doing nothing else except catching up on this book that needs to be done, so it doesn't get delayed.
Oh my god, you co-created Magical Kitty Save the Day?
The second edition of it, yeah. Yeah.
No wonder we get along so well. Have you seen our stuff? Our stuff is nothing but magical kitties left and right. It's
Right?
it's all goofy and silly.
There it is, right there, yeah.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah.
Huh. All right. Well, thanks so much. And, well, buy the book if you can find it. And if you can't find it, then pre-order it and you'll get it when it comes
buy
in.
it anyway.
Buy it
Right,
anyhow.
pre-order. And while you're waiting, order a copy of Magical Kitty Save the Day. There's a bunch of great GMing advice in there, too.
Oh, really?
There you go.
Yeah.
Oh. I didn't even know about that one. I'm going to have to look at that one, too. Magical Kitty Save the Day. That is, That is an A++ title, I'll tell you right now. So I like that title. All right,
Well, thank
everyone.
you all so much.
Thanks.
Take
Like,
care.
subscribe,
Bye,
and
everyone.
do the thing, Mark.
Oh, you really want me to just do the no direction
Yes.
thing again? All right. Until next time, if you want to battle the zoo, you have to roll for combat.